Yo, how are you doing, folks? Welcome to episode 55, Big 55 of the Simpa Life Podcast. How are you doing, folks? It's been a strange old week. It's passed really quickly, to be honest with you. You can probably tell from the bags under my eyes. I'm not sleeping very well, to be honest with you. Something is bothering me, and I can't quite figure out what it is. There is something afoot, as they say, but I don't quite know where to find the shoe. Don't know what the fuck that means, but there you go. That's what my brain decided to open this podcast with, folks. So you dissect that and let me know in the comments what the fuck I mean. Tonight's guest is geographically quite close to me, just across the border. He is a Scotsman who is, I suppose, my Scottish counterpart. Runs a podcast. He's an illustrator and author. Produced actually quite a few books I have found while doing a little bit of research today. From a dad's illustration guide to being a dad, to the various CannaMan volumes, A Town Called Fun, and a case for cannabis, as well. You can find him all over the internet as CannaMan at CannaMan TV. He is Conor Macleod. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing brilliant, man. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. How you doing?
I'm not too bad. Just fucking sparked first joint of the day, so that should be good.
Oh, man. What a day you must have had then, indeed, brother.
I have. It's been busy, man. It's been one of those.
Yeah, that's what you get for being a family man.
Well, it's one of the consequences, you know.
It has its benefits, though, I'm told.
It certainly does. It certainly does, definitely. They certainly weigh out the negatives anyway.
It would seem that otherwise, I kind of think people would stop having kids by now.
To be honest, I don't know if one of the best things I've had about having kids is being able to write the books. Most of those books you mentioned are for the wee man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what The Town Called Fun. That was actually the first kids book I did. The same again, The Fat Guy and Zippy and all those ones. That's essentially, I didn't know at the time, but that's what was preceding the CannaMan animation. You know, the CannaMan comics. So it was a high five to the man for getting me to do that.
Excellent. It's weird and wonderful the ways and the places in which we find motivation in this world, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, he's certainly a motivation, like, definitely.
So, do you think that having him has sort of changed your illustration style or the message that you're trying to put out?
To be honest, having the wee man was kind of what instigated everything I'm doing. I was always kind of drawing the whole time at school, stuff like that. Like, bizarrely simple. When I think about my life and how it's at the moment, I kind of think that I'm becoming more and more a determinist. You know, it's like life is planned out for you, and you just have to have that introspective ability to see that the dominoes were pre-stacked. You know, they were pre-there. You know, they just knocked over and followed you, because tons of instances of me sitting in school, drawing the teachers and all these different things, and at the same time, like, trying to figure out what I'm doing in life, you know. I was getting stoned, and, you know, lunchtime getting ripped at school, stuff like that. And then I just moved forward. And it was interesting. The very first proper research I ever did was when I was like 16, and it was in fourth year, and I had to research, and it was like for drug policy. So I was like, well, I'm going to research legalizing cannabis. That's when I came across, obviously, the endocannabinoid system, and it was like the LCA at the time and all these different other things. And then it was like, that was when I was about 16, and then I got to be 18. Wasn't going to, this is true, man. I wasn't going to any of the exams and like that. And my rector came and picked me up for the house, like, chapped the door. I'm standing in my boxers, totally surprised he's there. I was like, what the fuck, man? And he was like, hey, go and get changed. And I was like, what? So he kind of like pushed me in the house. Obviously, I went upstairs, got changed. He took me up there, and I sat in the hall, and he was over at the window looking over, like, you know, making sure I'm doing the thing. And I drew a big cartoon of a guy holding a joint on the front page, and I'm sitting there at 18 thinking, I'm so funny, total asshole. And I was literally, man, sitting there. So I was like, all I could picture is the examiner opening up, Conor Macleod, you know, Kirtland High School, opening up and seeing this big fucking cartoon with a guy with a joint. So when I think about all those different things, and then I'm doing the channel, and then obviously, you know, the CannaMan TV thing is, you know, the comic book's good, you know. Nice. You pal?
Yeah, it seems to be video bombing quite a few of the recordings recently. I'm going to think that he's well-loved, fed, and given all the attention. Right, go on, bud. Jump down. Oh. Yeah, so it is interesting. You talk about determinism. I was the same. I remember doing, you know, those aptitude tests. Sometimes they make you do, where you kind of fill in a questionnaire, and it goes like, what is your ideal career? Yeah. And so I remember, about 15, 16, sat in an IT lesson, having to do one of these things that we were told to do. And it came out as author. And I'm like, hate English, hate words, not doing this. It's not a subject I do very well in at all. So went back through it, tried, or I thought I tried anyway, to answer the questions entirely differently. Came out author again.
Nice.
Could have had nearly 20 years. What am I doing? I'm sat as a writer. You know, it's my predominant sort of income stream. It is the main thing that I am I suppose escalating is a career, you know, it's something that I'm progressing within.
Yeah. So that's bizarre. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what your philosophy is then on that. I mean, at what point does that determinism start? Is that at the point of conception, when you know, when the egg is met, that kind of thing, or is that like once social influences shape the individual's consciousness in a particular direction? Because it seems to be that there's a correlation between the individual's biological ability to reach a certain level of intelligence and the external factor of like social influence, you know, and then you merge all that and then you've got this individual at the end that just seems like they couldn't escape their end, you know, their end result, you know, their end fucking goal.
I think unfortunately one of my philosophies fortifies the idea of that being true, of determinism unfortunately being the pervading thing of the universe, because I believe that if I was born you, raised as you, and lived your life,
yeah,
I'd be sat as you right now, talking every sentence as you. I'd live exactly as you. And then what I can extrapolate from that being a belief of mine is that then there is only one consciousness pervading the universe, and it's almost like it's manifest in everything. You know what I mean? So there is like a collective sentience, as it were. And the only way I can think to describe that in my own head, or the way it makes sense to me, is almost like the multiverse theory. And so every decision determines another multi-reality, multi-dimension. And then so we're almost just shifting through this, and that we weave this line of our life through these choices. And is that then ultimate question of whether those choices are predetermined, or whether we can do something different, or whether doing that different thing was ultimately what we were meant to do.
Yeah, it's interesting because I personally believe it's like a collective unconscious, and each one of us are kind of like subjectively experiencing this unified field of consciousness, and it's bizarre because if you like, sometimes I think to myself the best way to try and figure out. Because let's be honest, what is this? What is it we're trying to do? We're trying to find a normative truth of existence. That's what we're trying to do here. This is an existential quest. And the only way you could truly indulge existentially is by looking cross-culturally at what humans have came up with outside of your own geography. And it seems to be that like cross-culturally, like there's not a human society which hasn't came up with some deity, some spiritual element, you know, that some other that seems to presuppose human existence. Interestingly, I was watching Robert Sapolsky, evolutionary biologist, and he says that religion is nature's antidepressant. So individuals who are religious have a reduced tendency for being depressed, and also, like, I don't know how clearly obviously must have been like brain waves or some brain registered thing where they're measuring this kind of thing, but with each step of religious belief is a reduction in stress levels. So I think when you believe there is a God, immediately I think dopamine arrives, and then like cortisol goes down, and you're then walking towards like, you know, then it's like not only there is a God, he's also a benevolent God, you know. So again, stress goes down. He's a benevolent God that cares about you and wants you to do well, and each single one of these individual steps collectively reduces the individual stress. You know, he actually added quite a funny thing at the end, saying he's an atheist, so most likely he'll be committing suicide at some point.
It's an interesting point that you raise, because then the state in the past century in the West has tried to become the new form of God in that sense. They've tried to fulfill those roles. And both of those are proto roles that arrive from that of the parental role. And so, yeah, I think that it is almost, I don't want to offend anybody of religious or spiritual inclination. I myself am a bit, let's call me spiritually agnostic, maybe, I think is a good way to describe it. But I think that, as you said, part of that is an ego defense from facing a harsher truth about reality. But I think that the people that then go to the extremity of either end, whether it is into religiosity, if we want to call it that, or into, say, radical acceptance, to use the psychoanalytic term, that I think they arrive at the same point. And so whether it's you're nihilistic or whether you're a true believer, as it were, of whatever your chosen faith, I think you have this acceptance that everything's going to be fine. It's almost that it becomes at a point where the bell curve reconnects. So I don't care meets everything is fine. Do you know what I mean? You have a certain sense of, I guess, not apathy, but everything will work out. And I think the same is true of then that determinism conversation that we've just had, that the reason I try and avoid determinism, I guess, in my own life is to avoid me trying to consciously make better decisions. If I then go, this is just the way it's meant to be, I can excuse then, say, my own apathy or laziness in a moment. If I'm then going, oh, I haven't slept very well, I've eaten a shit diet the past few days, I'm feeling crap, so I'm just gonna bail on that friend, or I'll miss that meeting, or I'll move that appointment. Do you know what I mean? Whereas if I then wasn't so as a person and not so accepting of my deterministic reality, I would then be more inclined to challenge that thought process and then thus change my life. And I think one thing that I highlight in my own head here is a friend I had as a teenager once said to me, they were a somewhat devout Christian, came from quite a religious family, that they believed that a quarter of the world are evil. And it's still something that blows my mind.
Yeah, that's kind of missing the point, because let's be honest, 100% of the world is evil. The capacity for evil exists in all of us. That's what this is. It's like, I don't think to say that some of us are evil. I think that often, because I have this conversation with my brother, he's like, I think personally, a failing I think that happens when it comes to religion is, first off, like this anthropomorphic element. We apply human characteristics to something like that. And I think the thing that personally, like, obviously this is all just subjective personal opinion, obviously, but I think the subjectivity which exists is the closest thing that's there. Just when you're talking about the determinism thing, there's quite an interesting like Sam Harris, he's on he's a neuroscientist. You've probably heard of him most likely. He's got this like test that they do for free will, when he asks the person, like, think of a city. And that's what I mean. I think the determinism, still, people can have free will, but we're still determinists. Each decision obviously proceeds and as a consequence of the next move, but he says this thing where he's like, you can do a test to show that the determinism's constantly active by just asking somebody to think of a city, and immediately you could do it now, and viewers that are watching, think of a city, and then the city that pops in their head, hypothetically, they think of, just say, I don't know, Egypt as a fucking city. Excellent, there's geography. The entirety of Egypt's a city, mate, fuck's sake. Failed geography, you could tell that for a fucking first. But hypothetically then, just think, New York, there we go, New York. And that's what the individual thought, but they were aware of, they're aware of like Glasgow, they're aware of fucking London, they're aware of Belfast, and yet none of these immediately popped to their mind. These things were almost inhibited to them at the time, but their whole life experience up until that moment of being asked the question of, think of a city, they probably came across hundreds of cities, maybe thousands of cities, and yet they, at that particular moment, it was inaccessible to them, and on a literal neurochemical level, which strongly implies that with each decision that we make, we're inhibited based on, like you mentioned, what you've eaten that day, your emotional state, the decision that you're walking down, all these different other things, there are, which is going to lead towards a deterministic outcome. So I think sometimes the external of like the world is determined, the world is walking towards something, is one side of the dichotomy, and the other side is that we are the subjective experiences. We experience this stuff subjectively, and we're like, it's like anything, you can't have art without the observer. What is art without somebody to look at it? And I think the same thing is that we're it's like we're introspective of the objective world, it seems.
Yeah, there's a lot to digest.
Sorry, man. I said this to you before.
No, it's good. This is spot on. This is spot on. So yeah, it's interesting in that to go to that thought experiment of then think of a city. Yeah, it's I can see where you're going.
Yeah. Ironically, I couldn't even name a fucking city in Egypt.
Cairo,
there we go. High five.
I'll admit that's probably the only city in Egypt I can recall, so I do apologize for my geographical ignorance as well there. But that's then, yeah, as you say, going to be determined by, say, if they were born in the Western Hemisphere, for crude terminology, let's say, if they were born up in the West and brought up under sort of Western education, it is more than likely they will then lean towards a Western city. If it's then, their list in their brain will then be made up, as you said, of potential places that they've been, places that they've maybe had a desire to visit. We all have that kind of romantic element of one location as a kid. We kind of think that's where all of my problems don't exist. We see this magical thing, I think of Fiji and from the Truman Show, and this kind of, it holds this image of true freedom, this magnificent place, you know what I mean? And I think most people would then draw into that. So then that's determined, by this previous event that then, as you said, is determined by the previous event, all the way then back to conception. So then it is then your life determined at the point of conception, or is it then arguable that the events leading to the meeting of your two was going to say parental units there. Your mother, your biological
cold description.
Your biological mother and father meeting and in the act of copulation, actually, I was going to say generating, creating, and bringing into life you. But then there's other counters and other. It's just, so basically, what I'm trying to arrive at here is that I'd say it's a majority deterministic reality because it's then mappable, as it were, with enough data you can predict future events. But I'd say there's enough free radicals and variables within it that it could still always do something unexpected. I think of Neo talking in the Matrix and then about the stone. So you throw it and it could, you expect it to go down, but at any point it still could just go up. Could still just go up.
No, it's interesting. Interesting when you said that. Like, where does determinism start? Is it the point of conception? Like parents. I was even thinking, it could potentially be at the Big Bang. Where would it all start? Legitimately, it would never be individual units of human action which separately have been deterministically decided and then they've started. It would be collectively one unit of existence that's all been a consequence of the preceding factor, because essentially, is that not what evolution is? Evolution is, random mutation based on like probability. Is that not what that's supposed to be? Based on survival mechanisms and all these different things. That's determinism. It's like whatever is most likely to survive. Or like I had a guy on the channel recently, Dr. Bob Mellenmead, and he talks about it's not about surviving, it's about adapting. So it was the nature of the species in which survives. It's because they can adapt to the circumstance. I suppose it's potato almost to an extent.
Why do you think we're here? Look at us as a species. Why do we predominate the world? It is, because of our adaptability. And I guess if you look at the stoned ape theory, at some point, some of our ancestors decided to really tuck into some mushrooms. I guess, sometimes it feels relatively anticlimactic. Like we are the consequence of millions of years of evolution, and we're sitting there on the couch, fucking scratching our arse, watching TV. It's like, this is what we've culminated to. But
it's
weird though, because it almost feels like, if we then go back to consciousness being one thing that is then manifest in a multitude of different vessels, for a crude way of describing it, the more vessels you have, the more diluted, as it were, that would be. So I think that the reason that humans probably adapted the way that we did is that there were kind of less of us. I mean, if you look at Dr. Rupert Sheldrake's work on morphic resonance.
Yeah, he's good.
So I think if you consider then how he speaks of like almost like a viral idea. So that then when the concept I think that they showed that became most popular in the mainstream media was about crows. I think it was crows or blackbirds that were picking gold top milk. And they figured out that they get through the top to get to the milk, and then the same behavior was observed in the same species in multiple regions around the world. Without them having a time or ability for those birds to actually interact or for those birds to change locale. I think the same is then true of human behavior. I think this is why look at skateboarding, for example. The first generation of skateboarders, there was a handful of people that could do some of the tricks, and it took them a hell of a long time to really learn, work out the sport and how it kind of operates and how to control a board. Now there are some people that pick it up and in a year are killing it, absolutely, unreal. And I think that is because once these concepts and ideas proliferate more, it's almost like we tap into it. The only way I sort of think of it is the sort of Jainist idea of like akasha, which is like there is this vault sort of knowledge, and all experience exists at all times, and we are simply born and tune into it.
I fully agree, Simpa. Actually, I often refer to it as obviously like intuition as the utility that you could use to extract the information that's present in the universe. It was like you've got Aristotle and Socrates who are articulating, the laws of physics way before there was any technology to quantify or clarify these things as real, and yet they're able to intuit these things, and again, I mean, you find this cross-culturally when the ability for introspection to detach yourself from society. It's like it's almost like a paradox that the more you detach yourself from society and culture, the more you see what it is, and the more you're ingrained in it, the more the mechanics of what's going on become invisible to you.
Yeah, little by little each day you become more a cog within as you say, a machine that removes your autonomy, but it gives you the illusion of free will. And I think that to bring us round to sort of the deterministic conversation again, I think there are elements within human society that kind of understand this more than others. And I think this is what kind of happened with Freud's, was it his nephew or his first cousin or something like that,
Edward Bernays.
Bernays, yeah. And sort of the weaponization of psychoanalytics into marketing and advertising.
Yeah.
And so then, you're free to make these choices, but they're within that determined remit. So if you go, I want a car, I need a car, we go, okay, you're free to buy a car, but then there's only X amount of car manufacturers, there's only X amount of cars you've got the option for. Yeah. So you're not really free. There's always still those limitations of systems. But I think that within, say, cars, for example, that you got somebody that'll come along in a generation and create something like the fucking DeLorean. You know what I mean? For everyone, if there wasn't the variance and the difference, if there wasn't free radicals, everybody would be driving a Fiat 500. Yeah. For example, I don't know, some random car pull, but everyone would have the same car. If it was literally a case of a deterministic universe where kind of everybody was trying to achieve the same outcome, because their life was kind of determined to achieve the same ends. I'm not saying everyone is in that sense. Then everything would be much more standardized. So I think that there is this deterministic start to finish, but I think that there are still, all of us in the same way have the ability to commit great atrocities. We have the ability to commit great good and great innovation to randomly just go, hey, what happens if I drink the white stuff that comes out of that cow's tit? What happens if we go and we do this? What happens if we do you know what I mean? If I smoke this plant, for example, to bring us around to cannabis, it's weird that there's, and I think it must fluctuate the balance of it in society in society over time. And I think at the minute, because of the sheer amount of information that we are generating because of the digital age, I think we're in a saturation point of ideas and concepts. And this is why I feel personally in my life, I'm rebelling against determinism, because nothing feels, I don't know, certain, measured, determinable.
Yeah. It's interesting actually, because when you says they're saturated with information, I'm reading a book by Robert Greene. It's Mastery, it's called, and he's I don't know if you're familiar with him. He does a lot of social insights towards the psychology of behavior and stuff. He's not, he's brilliant. He's got really good stuff. And in it, he's got this point where he describes, and I just thought to myself, it's kind of consistent, what you're talking about, this information age, because again, all the previous actions have led to where we are at now. And we're in this situation where it's like, you're able to, really like accelerate your ability to understand just based on the information that we have. So you've got the internet, you've got YouTube and all these kind of things, and you can literally learn degrees and stuff, in a short period of time in comparison to it would take years and years and years. And he's got this thing where he obviously talks about it on a micro level with the individual, but it's applicable to the society, as a whole, where he says that the individual that engages in a particular craft at the beginning is inevitably going to engage with actions of drudgery and tedium. Because it's new to them, so it's juvenile to an extent. It's a really mundane, boring task over and over and over, and eventually, by repeating these boring tasks over and over, they reach this point of the period of accelerated returns. Now, the accelerated returns is where there's a period of time that is you get a disproportionate amount of reward compared to the time you've been engaged in the craft. Anyway, so there's this, and that's why he calls it the period of accelerated returns. And it almost seems like that's what human society is engaged with at the moment. We're in this period of accelerated returns where the past 20 years, as a result of the internet, social media, all these different other connecting elements, we've accelerated like tremendously in this small period of time. And inevitably it's just going to keep going and going and going. And I think it'd be interesting to see the fucking pie chart or whatever, the bar graph, watch it burst through the ceiling in the next 20 or 30 years. But it certainly seems like I'm in full agreement to that. There's a period of information saturation that's going on. And even just to take it back to that, thing we were talking about earlier, was that it seems to be the main important thing. It should be on the podcast soon, it'd be good. But yeah, the main important thing in today's world, it seems to be, is the ability to learn. That seems to be the priority. Is, if you're not able to, because the reason I was saying that actually, because I was talking to my son this morning about this. We went to school and he was talking about, I don't like learning this, I don't like learning that. And I was like, it's not about the thing you're learning. It's like, it's about the process of learning. And I was like, it's not about, you're not going to like English or PE, maths, whatever these. It's good to get the grades and that's what you're aiming for. But I was like, you just have to keep it in your mind that it's about the process of getting to that last point, learning this stuff in the first place, which is good,
Yeah, exactly that. And it's teaching them to discern information, how to actually take something, reasonably run it through a filter of their own mind of going, is the biases, prejudices inbuilt to this? Is it loaded in terms of, has somebody sort of constructed this sentence, as it were, to manipulate or deceive? And then to be able to kind of feel it out, as it were. You know what I mean? Use those instincts, as you spoke of before, to kind of go, well, that doesn't feel instinctively right, but then not to immediately dismiss something because it doesn't, to be curious, to be inquisitive of why they feel the information is wrong, and then be able to go and do independent research to verify, not with an intrinsic bias, going, oh, does this do this, to try, you know, in searching to try and find information that validates your pre-existing hypothesis, that actually allows you to check that. And I think that a lot of kids growing up today, because of the standardization of education, don't really have that. They're not taught how to hear something and go, well, that doesn't sound right, and then how to be able to discuss amongst themselves, how to be able to challenge these concepts, these ideas. So I think it leads to an increase of apathy. And I think it's, again, where it comes back to that sort of determinism, if that then most kids go, well, my life's already predetermined. I wasn't born into a rich family. I'm lower class. My life is going to be shit. Do you know what I mean? So there is, because society almost goes that we are determined to be those things. And I think that there needs to be more of an encouragement of that free radical element.
Even the structure of the classroom, like when you're talking about the standardization of education, even the structure of the classroom kind of inhibits their ability to challenge. You know, the teacher says something, this is the task we're doing, there we go. And if the kid's sitting there on their own, like, wait a minute, I don't really, or they have a comment or whatever, I mean, they could put their hand up or whatever, but the reality is, this is today's task, this is what we're doing. You know, so Elon Musk's he says, and it's quite funny because I think everybody would laugh at it, but, you know, it's like, if you were to make schooling as similar to gaming as possible, you would have tremendous, you know, grades just as a result of the engagement that children have for gaming.
But it depends on what, I suppose, what you want to determine the outcome to be. If you are then the people that set the curriculum, if you control the standards of the education in any given region, most often, I can't think of the quote of who the guy who said it, but no one is going to give you a good enough education to overthrow them. Can't remember who that's attributed to. If anyone knows who it is, please do drop in comments below. But yeah, it's true. No one is going to want to empower you enough to be able to see beyond their bullshit. And so I think this is where it comes down to these alternative forms of education, these learning platforms. So if you look at, say, as you said, YouTube, you can basically get enough of it, if you know how to discern that information, if you know how to really do peer research and understand how to verify information, then you could get enough of a valid education without the qualification from online resources that you would get from a 4-year degree paying $9+ grand a year. But the difference is the acceptance of that education. So you could be truly knowledgeable within your field. And I know some people within cannabis and drugs reform that would blow university professors out of the water with the wide remit of their knowledge, their ability to be able to challenge and articulate and break down arguments and discussions and debate people is second to none. But because they don't have an accredited qualification, they don't have letters after their name, they're not afforded the same platform as somebody that was able to pay for that air quotes education. They then get to stand on a stage, they then get to write books and articles and produce content and works that then fortify their pre-existing positions without ever having to learn or challenge those positions. And I think that's how you end up with this stagnation of information, which then, I guess, to a lot of people within certain fields can feel that, I suppose, to move away from personal determinism into, I suppose, career determinism. I feel this. I've met teachers that have gone 2 years in and gone because they feel they can see the next 40 years because they don't feel they have the ability to challenge it. So it's, again, that almost deterministic mindset of going, well, no, this is what teaching is, instead of going, what can I bring to this, you know?
Yeah. I fully agree. Interestingly, you reminded me, there's a fella in Tesco's the other day, and he was standing chatting with this other, 2 elderly gentlemen, and that's what the boy says, oh, so you're still at the place? And the guy's, oh, that's 40 years I've been there now. And he said it with pride, and I suppose there's pride in the guy's eyes, and it was good, but honestly, there's a part of me that was like, mate, fuck, 40 years in the same building, you kidding me? But a different dynamic, totally different generation. They obviously taught you go out and get a job, and the structure of society was different. Industry was alive back then. Whereas it's different now. It's this completely different, totally different world.
I think, as you said, it's generational differences. So I think it's fireworks going off in my street. A little bit late, guys. Again, then I think their generation's outcomes, their lives were determined by let's call it the cultural myth. the narrative of their times, which was the ideal was the nuclear family. You get married, you have 2.5 kids, you have a career that you work at your whole life, you pay into a pension, you retire, and you maybe go to Spain several times a year or whatever else, you know what I mean? And that was the life plan for millions of people, determined by the cultural inclinations set out by the media, governmental policy, and various other influential bodies within society. And I feel that part of the issue, I don't want to call it the issue, one of the things that I struggle with in modern society, in the world that we live in today, is that nothing feels determined. I almost feel like it's the opposite. They've gone from being everything's so limited that you're only determined of your careers here's 4 jobs you can do. You basically could be electrician, plumber, carpenter, whatever. Use a few basic jobs. Now the jobs market is so saturated that it's almost paralyzing. Do you know what I mean? The people, I've met a lot of people, especially people that are younger than me, that have all the potential in the world. They are bright, they are capable, they are competent, but they are paralyzed with anxiety because they're scared to make the wrong choice because there's too goddamn many. Oh, I want to go and do this and I'll be this. And no, but then that's 30 years and I've wasted my life. Oh, what if I go do this? And because they can't see, and the structure of society doesn't allow them to just dip. This is why the gig economy is booming at the minute. People want the ability to go, I can work in an office for the next 6 months. Oh yeah, screw it. I'll deliver pizzas for a bit. I'll be an Uber driver. Do you know what I mean? They don't have to then qualify to go and do a year's or a couple worth of training. And then in that, through the education of that, it determines the rest of their life, because then they meet the friends that they're more likely to spend the rest of their time with. Often people will meet their partner that will spend the rest of their life at the university or thereafter in the professional area within the remit of their professional lives. You know what I mean? So I think that, that's kind of what they mean when they say at 16 that you need to make these decisions about your GCSEs and your qualifications because it'll determine your life. I think that's kind of what they're saying. Yeah,
it certainly sounds like. I mean, I went back to college actually when I was about 6 or 7 years ago. And it was refreshing. The lecturer, the very first, we sat there, sound as anything guy, and he says, look, and it wasn't, I don't think he was including me just because obviously I'm a mature student, but he was talking to the rest of them, the younger people in the class, and he said, it's not about what you're going to do for your life, it's about what you're going to do first in your life. And I was like, that's a great thing to hear. I'd never heard that before. And it took me to be 25 sitting in the classroom to hear that. I was like, that's brilliant. That's the introduction that these people are getting for college. That was their introduction for college, was to, it's not about what you're going to do for your whole life. It's about what you're going to do first in your life. I was like, that's just, it stuck with me. That's how impactful that statement was,
It's interesting because so again, then the lives of those sort of the children are determined by the teacher. And then if because of the nature of the profession of teaching, those free radicals are pushed out, are removed from that because they're variables that are non-controllable. We can't, you can't allow these children to learn things slightly off curriculum. We've created this to homogenize the experience and to standardize their knowledge base. It's interesting, actually, slightly sidebar on this. I saw a project, I think it's in America at the minute, somebody wants to put together, they're trying to resource fund for it, I think, which is basically, you would create a database of academic knowledge for each year. So then say whatever year you left school, you could then go and put your year in. And what it would do is then give you information on facts that have been disproven. So So I think a concept like that would be amazing for this to remind us to challenge that actually, no, just because I learned that when I was 14, 15 doesn't mean it's still true when I'm 50.
Yeah, it's funny, all I had in my head there was somebody standing reading the list going, this is everything I knew. Shit, I know nothing.
but that's the truth of it. And I think this is what happens back to that bell curve of, say, the nihilist atheist on one side and the evangelicalist religious individual on the other is of that kind of acceptance of, I don't know anything and I don't need to know anything almost. Somebody else has got this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like Socrates. What he says, all I know is that I know nothing.
Yeah, and I would say, that is the height of intelligence. I mean, continue on with the Greeks, but Socrates who said that a measure of intelligence is to be able to hold an idea and concept, but it not be one's own. So basically, be able to think of shit. Yeah. So I think that that's what a lot of people missing. I think this is why, to bring us onto the drug segment, I guess, of the podcast, a lot of people turn to illicit substances, as it were, to use a crude terminology. And that's a really bad way of describing it. Intoxicants, euphoriants, forms of chemical escape, whether it be from sugar, caffeine, tobacco, alcohol, all the way through to heroin, cocaine, cannabis, etc. I think that the prevalence of that, and I think especially the prevalence of alcohol in our culture, is that it kind of quietens that inquisitive mind. It kind of forces more into that deterministic reality of going, well, actually, all right, I'll work the week and whatever happens, but Friday I get a party.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of installs that behavior. So then people become more, not necessarily, well, yeah, apathetic and more accepting of their lot in life, as they say. And this isn't to belittle anyone that consumes alcohol. That's not what I'm saying. But we know that it slows down. It's classified in the literature as a neurological retardant. It slows the connections between neurons in the brain. And we know over time the destructive and detrimental effect that it has on neurological processing. So I think that coupled with then sort of the easy lifestyle of, we're going to chippy on the way back, the apathy of a terrible diet leading to then a sedentary lifestyle, which often then accompanies then an over-stressful job. The culmination of these things mean most of us don't have the opportunity to stop and go, whoa, where am I? What am I doing? And I think that's why drugs are having a renaissance really at the minute, especially entheogenic compounds, because they're waking people up for the first time to themselves to go, holy shit, this isn't what I wanted. They said I'd choose my life at 16, and I said I'd get a job, and I looked down, and now I'm 45. What the fuck?
Yeah, thing is, it's weird actually. You make me think that. It's like, wonder what it's going to look like then, like culturally, 25 years time. Because 25 years ago, cannabis was way more stigmatized. It was way back. Magic mushrooms, you would never even get to talk about psilocybin or any psychedelics. That wouldn't even be a conversation to have outside circles that were in favor of them. So, like anything, society as a whole is influence based in its intoxicants, let's be honest. And if you're taking things that are going to stimulate you cerebrally, if I'm saying that fucking word wrong, then inevitably on a wide spectrum of influence, that's going to have a huge impact, so it should be interesting, the next 25, 30 years, the introduction, the push more of psychedelics, cannabis, with the availability of such a wide amount of information that you can get firsthand. It's like, I really don't think anybody can kind of speculate what society is going to look like in 50 years' time. Neuralink and all these different other things come into play, but it's just very peculiar times, very peculiar times.
Yeah, and that's what I mean about why for a long time I was kind of, attracted to, I guess, this idea of determinism because of the mechanism I spoke of before about my, let's call it adjacent philosophies. But I think then, now looking at it, the technology and the ever increase in the number of those free radical agents, let's say, in that deterministic universe, creates more variable outcomes, more different potential futures for us. And I think some of them are Ready Player One sort of style, into the metaverse where there's rampant classism in reality, but everyone fights over a virtual space. If you look at what's happening with cryptocurrencies, NFTs, etc., that would be evident towards that kind of future. But then on the other side of it, you've got companies with patents of turning literally water into jet fuel. We have various patents and projects around using mycelium to clean up all kinds of industrial waste. There's projects out there that are cleaning nanoplastics. There are giant solar powered machines in the water clearing up all of the waste out there. There's so many potential positive technologies there that could then begin to negate the harm that is currently be causing and actually start to reverse it. But then the funding for that isn't really there. If you then look at where we are with renewable technology, we've still got places in the world that are going to double and triple their coal and gas usage, while the West and the big nations are stood around going, oh yeah, we're doing this and we're committed to this. And there's these different paths that we could potentially walk. But I think that, to go back to that kind of messy multiverse idea that I was on about before, I think that we've moved into such a fluctuating reality that at any given point we just shift. And I only mean that in a way to describe it. I don't mean that's how I physically mean that we think we travel through space. I mean that things fluctuate so fast that very few people can actually determine it. Whereas 30, 40 years ago, there was certainty. There was fucking certainty about so fucking many things. Whereas now it feels like we're all having to relearn everything every few months, every few weeks, because there's this information, somebody points something out, a free radical appears, and then it has to readjust that path that is set out by that deterministic reality. And I think that it's almost like the equation of it is going to arrive at a point where there's too many free radicals for there to be any deterministic future in which everything then has to stop. How could reality exist beyond that point unless it then becomes we're truly free? Which then means is the deterministic systems in reality something in the...
1 minute, Simpa. I hate to turn this off. Fucking grow light, man.
Sorry, I just paused it there.
Yeah,
so I was going to say, so is the determinism of the universe something in the, let's call it the metaphysics, in the tapestry of reality, or is it something that humans manifest into our systems? So...
Just when you said that, like when you're talking about the free radicals, because again, I can't detach my mind, man, for determinism. Like it's so, like I'm becoming more and more convinced that this is the case. When you're talking about that, are we jumping from linear path to linear path on a multidimensional area because of the what's going on in this thing? And it's almost like in that context of the multidimensional fabric, if there's like almost like I have that image in my mind of the shredded wheat advert. I don't know if you remember when it's like all the layers of shredded wheat and all come down together. You know, that's a picture of that there. Whereas like if we're jumping about from that, it's almost like our universe would be the free radical in the context of that. And the thing about the free radicals as well, and obviously you're mentioning, it's like we have free radicals in our body, you know, which obviously play a huge influence. And one free radical can completely, you know, you can kill you immediately. So you've got this continuous internal physiological battle that's going on a cellular level that contains free radicals. And yet that's on a micro level. Yet on a macro level, that's displayed as one unit. That's displayed as an organism that's got one direction on that day that's moving forward. And yet it's made up of a collection of variables, which individually are individual. And yet they form one unit of entity, you know. So it's like I find it quite interesting that it's almost just very often I think of this, that there's like we're in this paradox thing where it's like people say that it's like if we're talking about God and the nature of that, you know, if there is a God and there isn't a God, blah blah. And it's like, I personally believe, like, you know, it's for those that believe that there isn't one, there truly isn't, because they can't see it anyway. So it's completely absent. And for those that are like, no, there is a God, it's like, no, well, that is for them. And I'm not meaning that there's not a normative value that can be reached. Personally, I was saying this to my brother the other day, and I was like, I think we're still in the early doors of science. So I think if we're to be legitimate, I think that the reality is, we're in a circumstance, as long as humans don't perish beforehand, that the reality is we might get to a point where science can quantify the absolute. You know, in Aristotle's terms, the absolute in that sense is that it's the Big Bang, it's the point of birth, it's the bright white light that we would all say that is God, because that's what's bringing the energy from. You know, that's the frequency, that's the consciousness birth kind of thing. And it just seems like that it's like it's. You know, we're in the early doors yet. We just need to. It just feels sometimes that there could be a quantifying ability for what we describe as metaphysics and difficult. But yeah, just obviously to try and not go so abstract. It's like I do believe that when you're talking about the free radicals, that kept popping to mind. It's like to have a free radical is obviously an independent entity, and yet in our bodies we have these free radicals which are independent, and yet they accumulate together to form one unit. You know, so it's interesting. You know, I like it.
Yeah, I suppose then to take the body as an analogy of the universe, or to use it as a stand-in, I guess, the free radical is then formed within the universe. So then, even though we as the observer of the action of it in the body cannot determine what it will do, doesn't mean it's not determined to then do something.
Yeah.
So in Aristotle, we've spoken quite a few times here of a lot of the ancient Greek philosophers. I mean, it's people like, was it I'm trying to get the order right. I think it was it Socrates who said that basically the objects fall not because of gravity, because they get tired. Right. He basically spoke of like they just because that was the language that they had to describe it. They hadn't come up with anything close to gravity, but they understood enough of gravity from living in the physical world to apply it. It's not like they couldn't build anything or they couldn't use any other science because they didn't have this knowledge of gravity. And I feel that's where we are with so fucking much of human experience, that we're waiting for Newton. We're waiting for our free radical of our individual, of somebody that can have that kind of, and then hopefully with the the channels of connection that we have to each other, be able to spread and proliferate that information and debate and discuss it with others to find knowledge, actual discernible truth. And I think the issue, or one of the issues that we live with in the 21st century, is that truth isn't what a lot of people are seeking anymore. For the longest time, people sought meaning, and for a lot of people that manifested in religion. So that was a way to excuse almost this, but why? The toddler in all of us, why? I think a way to excuse that is to go, big man upstairs has got it. Don't you think about that? You know what I mean? And then the other side of that is then you're overly inquisitive individual that then we're breaking things down like quasarks and beyond, and that is almost like an endless pursuit. I swear to God, but because it's almost like life is having a joke with this. Because if you then you look at Mandelbrot's work with mathematics and the expression of oh my God, what they're called?
The Mandelbrot set.
What they are.
Fractals.
Fractals, thank you. Geometric fractals, and you look at the understanding of how the math of that works, and then how that sort of shape reiteration and how molecules are formed. It's going to continue almost infinite. As soon as we build a more powerful microscope, as it were, we'll get through down to another level. Then we'll build a more powerful, and that's what I was saying about the gravity thing, is that we're always going to learn more and learn more and learn more and learn more, because it's almost like we're not, as you said with the God thing, we can't know that we don't know something until we don't know we know it. Yeah. And I think that's almost leads us back to the point that even if life is deterministic, we should still be humble enough to kind of, or regardless of if it's deterministic or if you are entirely free to make whatever choice and decision and have autonomy in your lives, it almost doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's funny that actually, Simpa, because I love this conversation. I love this stuff, existentialism. I love the nature of being. I mean, I'd like to talk about the meaning more, because you mentioned meaning there, but there's a funny quote, and I'd love to figure out who was it that said it. But it says, because what we try to do here, try to figure out what's going on in the world. And as a consequence of that, you become enlightened. And there's a funny quote that, again, I can't remember who said it, but it's like, before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. And after enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. And I was like, what can you do with this circumstance, once you reach that point? But interestingly, Terence McKenna, I think that's what there's a cool connection between the Mandelbrot set, at least on a visual level, and psychedelics. Like, psychedelics produce obviously fractal dynamic, as does DMT and these things. And then the Mandelbrot set, anybody that's not seen it, I'd recommend, having a look at it. It's a psychedelic fractal. That's what that is. And that's what makes me think that there is. That's actually what makes me believe that there is a God, or that humans are like purpose orientated. Like, we are given a purpose, because when individuals that have taken psychedelics, like that have been atheistic, there's a huge percentage of them that often come back with a religious intention. Now, they then obviously, after that, they refer to that experience as a religious experience. They become more spiritually inclined after that, and it doesn't make sense on a scientific level, obviously. But if you look at it, and again, if you take the connection of that, so on a neurological level, that people they're changing their beliefs about the world. I'm sure you've seen it, Simpa, the neurological level of mycelium format, the structure of mycelium, and then the structure of the neural network, it's identical. And then you take the structure of the artificial intelligence network, it's identical. Yeah, and that's obviously not even a human construct. That's been a consequence of obviously lots of pieces of innovation that's led to this point. And it's the same thing with the universe. The structure of the universe seems to be consistent with the mycelium and the human neural network. So there's a correlation there that needs to be investigated further. And I think that when Terence McKenna talks about it often, obviously, but he talks about it, the transcendental object at the end of time, and that's as far as I need to actually, I'll probably watch something after this, to be honest, but I don't know what that object is. When he says the transcendental object at the end of time, is that God? Is that thing? Because he also talks about the acceleration of time, and how way back in the day, it's just a primordial soup of chemicals, but it was all slow and all that. And he takes the time, he says, when people think nowadays time's going really fast, it's going much faster. And he's like, because it is. We're in an accelerated time frame of human existence, and it's because action, the quantity of actions determine the length of time which you feel you've experienced. So if you've had a relatively uneventful day, you would kind of like, and the day might have dragged in. But I mean, think how many people have had action-packed days or a really busy day at work, and it flew in today, and it's because of the amount of actions that have actually been there at the time. So I find it peculiar. Psychedelics, the nature of psychedelics, the influence they have neurochemically on the brain, and also not a theological belief, but certainly spiritual belief, because these things, that's what makes me believe that humans have a tendency for spirituality. When you look at like archetypes, Joseph Campbell, he's a great guy for this kind of thing. But humans have this seemingly archetypal leaning about behavior and about how we act, and we have this thing where it's like we'll each play out an archetype in our lives and not even know that kind of thing. And these things are cross-cultural, where they have the archetype of the wise man, the old wise man in India, and then you've also got that over here. It's played out in with Gandalf. Like again, like I could probably bore the viewers with that, but that's what Lord of the Rings is telling us. That Lord of the Rings is telling us that the human capacity for creation is there. So if I was to quickly break it down for that, it's like Frodo is the everyman. Frodo is the everyman. So that's why he's just an average guy. And on the left of Frodo, you've got Gollum, who's the symbol of the evil. And on the right, you've got Samwise Gamgee, who's symbol of the good, the positive. So that's the dichotomy of good versus evil that exists in each one of our decisions. So Frodo has a task. And what is the task? He's going to destroy the One Ring. That One Ring symbolizes human capacity for creation. That's what that symbolizes, right? And the time you become fully engaged in it, you become almost invisible to the world. That's why I think that they made him invisible when he puts it on. And what's the nature of Frodo's action? He sacrificed himself for others. What does that sound like? That sounds like Jesus, Buddha, Gandhi, all these different people. He sacrificed himself for others. He does it for the group of people, like Aragorn and all the rest of the characters. So he takes it, and he takes the one, he takes the One Ring, but it's essentially, what is the One Ring symbolizing? The individual's pursuit of a creative task, or I'm going to do this for my life. I'm going to do this thing. And he does that, and what does he do? He crosses the Middle Earth. He comes across demons and dragons and all that. And these things are the symbolic representation of the ghouls in life, the people that are out to rob you and steal from you, or the challenges that you're going to experience as a consequence of engaging in this task. He goes over there, he achieves the world, he destroys the ring, he comes back, and he comes back to the Shire. And what is the Shire? The Shire is your local town, because he goes away, conquers the world, meets dragons and demons, and comes back, and nobody knows any different. Everybody's just like, hey man, how you doing? We don't believe your stories. And he just comes back into this humble dynamic. And these things, the reason why I'm saying this is because I believe that that's as close to the normative truth when it comes to religion as we can get. And I think people like J.R.R. Tolkien, Harry Potter, the author for Harry Potter, her name escapes me now. J.K. Rowling, there we go, good man. These people are talking about something that's fundamentally accessible to all humans. And the thing that's accessible to us is for all of us, but the thing that's unique about it is we all have this unique consequential output. And that's how I phrase it, where it's like every single one of us have lived a unique life, might have similarities, but it's ultimately unique. And as a result of that, you've been shaped in a way that you can produce something that only you can produce, only you, nobody else. And that's where it's like all of these things, I believe that's what religion's telling us. And that's what I believe, that I think that's as close, the nature of engaging in a creative task for the sacrifice for others. I believe that's as close as you can get, because that's on a micro level. On a macro level, everybody's essentially doing that, conscious or unconscious of it. On a macro level, you're forming a society that's moving in a direction. That's what's going on. On a micro level, it's just an individual living his life, her life, trying to get on and try to do creative tasks or engage on a daily grind for something or somebody. And that's represented just with your daily actions. And then on a macro level, as I said, it's a society that's a moving organism that's moving in a particular direction. And I believe that's what psychedelics lean you towards. That's what they show you. And I think that's what, like, archetypes and all these different mythological figures that seem to symbolically resonate with the human psyche, that's what's real for me personally, and that's what that's as close as I've got to figuring out what the fuck's going on, because to be honest, sometimes I find myself in space when I'm sitting there thinking about this stuff, man. But yeah, I find it really interesting, and I think sometimes it frustrates me when people are like, religion is a guy in the sky, or religion's I'm Christian, or I'm fucking a Muslim or whatever. It's like you're looking at it's almost like looking at your town and saying this is the only town in the world. It's like, no man, you're part of a huge thing that we all need to learn from each other and and move forward as a one unit,
Yeah, they're all expressions of the same kind of truth, as you say. I believe it massively to be true. I mean, a lot of the Abrahamic religions, that would be Catholicism, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. They all literally birth from the same era, the same place, and the same sort of narratives. And I think that a lot of the religious stories, the texts that are then within any of the tomes, the works of these religions, they all try to speak of ethics, of morality. They're trying to express certain even scientific concepts. You know, if you then go back to the ancient Greeks and the Romans and the gods that represented certain things, the same with a lot of the First Nation cultures of Northern and Central America. They would then use deities, gods. They would use what they could understand, which is when they're trying to speak it to another, it's imagine a man. What this man does is this. And it was a way because you didn't have the Socratic method. You didn't have the ability to record data, find a way to standardize that and be able to go, well, this is the current thing we're thinking. And then it wasn't quite, the mechanism hadn't quite arisen. And then where it did, what we actually found was, as you spoke of before interconnectivity. And I know part of this is quite contentious with a lot of modern science at the minute, with various land bridges and with various different evidences coming to show that the topography and the geography of the world was quite different for a period. But they're basically in isolation. A lot of these first cultures that arose on the different continents, they created the same artworks, they created the same iconography, they basically told the same stories, as you were saying. And I think that it is evidence that we've always been trying to understand this. We've always been trying to figure out, are we determined to do something, or do we have this free will? And I think that we're determined almost by our biological imperative. So as soon as we are birthed, we start to oxidize and die. We've got a very limited window which we can survive. Our cells work very hard to keep replicating and rebuilding us and regenerating. But ultimately, yeah, we're kind of born to die. So then part of that imperative within us is going, well, I want to mate with something. I want to progenate. I want to have a child and continue on this bloodline gene cycle beyond our own individual sort of personality or identity. There is sort of that biological sort of imperative. And then, I mean, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, sort of as a model for this, then there is the basis of going, well, hunger. So then when man's hunger is satisfied, if you're no longer needing to seek nutrition, you then start to look for, okay, well, then you need shelter, you need water, you need warmth. You then need to be able to understand the world around you and have an ability to engage with that. And then from that, you need to be able to develop relationships, networks, friendships, kinship. And then from that, find purpose, find meaning, and then have that feedback, that direct feedback of positivity in the world. And I think that the golems of the world, as it were, are people that are damaged because of the current incarnations of the system, limiting and trying to determine and create this homogenized human experience. So I think the harder the oppressive systems push and try and weaponize the deterministic nature of the universe against us, the more it creates free radical elements. And I think this is where we end up with, I mean, ultimately, the world we understand today is because of Freudian psychology. But at the time, there was Adler, Freud, and Jung. And they spoke of quite similar but different sort of narratives. And ultimately, we know Freud because of pop psychology and because of, as we spoke of, Benet's weaponization of it into advertising. We're not quite aware of who or what we are as people, I think. And I think the psychedelic experience, I think, for most of us, blasts us back to that child state again, that wondrous, curious state the first time you come across something and the neurons light up in the brain, you get that dopamine release, you get serotonin and adrenaline because you're excited and you're just like, rah, and you see it in kids when they're just like, ah, it's because their brain, they are just so fucking, literally on the chemical level and the neurological level, they are so excited by this new connection. Their brain is firing in all directions. If you think of this, those mycelium networks just moving off in every direction. And I think that then, because we know that psychedelics cause neurogenesis, the promotion of new neurological cell networks and neuroplasticity, novel thoughts, and I hate the idea of, say, if you think water running down pathways or energy running up energy wires to visualize it. In doing that challenges that deterministic worldview. And I think this is why you end up with people that either then come back from it with a religious or a spiritual inclination, because it's the closest language we have to describe it. But they end up on a trajectory looking like they're going, oh, la, 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 and then left. You know, so you end up with bankers that then end up sudden go to Burning Man, you know, 1 year and smoke some DMT or something. And then next thing you know, they're in Peru having an ayahuasca ceremony and they've suddenly given away the business and they're in Africa now building wells. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? That I don't think can be determined. They had a trajectory and a determined life. And I think that call it Gaia, call it the intrinsic intelligence of the world. I think the fact that these entheogenic compounds are most of them are naturally occurring, I think is the world kind of being like, here, get your egos in check, really, you know, work this shit out. And I think to go back to Freud, my philosophy on it, because Freud obviously broke it down with the ego, the superego, and the id. And the way that I sort of interpret that and think about it is I call it the head, the heart, and the hara. So the hara is like it's an old word for instinct. And then so your heart is your emotional center, and then your brain is your logic, your rational information processing, etc. And I think that so your hara is best describable as the instinct when you go to say step out in a road and you suddenly stop and then a car flies by. That's an intrinsic intelligence. It can take in information and data and stimuli from the world and determine and make action in the body in the same way that the heart can when you suddenly get an emotional attachment to something and you know you suddenly go and you go back to do something. Again, the emotional sort of center, and then the logical center of then going, I'm going to plan to do this. I'm going to in 3 months do this. And I think that then bringing those intelligences into alignment, that's when you get like true consciousness, true awareness. And I think then again, the entheogenic experience, even cannabis to some extent, reconnects you to these things. And I think for a lot of times and I've had the experience often of being sort of couch locked and really just so high and just like raw, and then just off somewhere in like some random conversation I had 10 years ago with somebody and feeling bad about something I said. And then like, why am I thinking this sort of thing? And then 2 days later, having a similar event and then kind of going, oh, I've learned a lesson here. I can apply this in my life. You know what I mean? And I think that all of these things are meant for us to experience them, good and bad. And I think that because of Freudian psychoanalytics and the pathologizing of human experience and these free radicals, saying that, oh, they've all got anxiety, they're all autistic, or they've all got Asperger's or depression or PTSD or personality disorders or whatever, they're not. These are just people that are connecting with these intelligences more than just the programming that their brain has been dealt. You know what I mean? Rather than because that's what education is giving us. They're only teaching us our brain. They're not telling us how to trust our instincts. They're not telling us how to love. I mean, you're even talking about what love is because we haven't figured that shit out. We've got centuries of art, of poetry, of great works, of literature and movies and all sorts and songs that we're not even close. We're not even close, but it's a fundamental part of every human experience. You will fundamentally love something, whether it's a Starbucks coffee or a dog or a parent or a partner in life. You know what I mean? And I think that the fact that we don't discuss those emotions, anyone that has them to an excess, give them pills. You can sit in a quiet room and talk to this paid professional who has had to go through 5 to 10 years worth of learning so that they don't give you the wrong information. Do you know what I mean? It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And whereas the spiritual leaders, the religious leaders for a long time, obviously we can say what we want about Catholics diddling children and whatever else. They were the confidants, the conscience of a lot of the cultural hubs and centers of the world. And I think that the decline of religion is kind of left for a period of quite nihilistic behavior in humans for a decade or two. And I think with entheogenic compounds, we're moving back into spiritual sort of thinking and inclination, which allows us to have similar moral ideals because they're all true. All of the religions basically, we can argue about certain things, but I'm going to say it's on the surface level, say that killing people is wrong, that violating people is wrong, stealing is wrong, etc. There's those commonalities. And I think that then comes back with the rise and reconnection of our emotional center of people that then take entheogenic compounds that then all of a sudden ringing people up and going, oh mate, you know what it is, right? A few years ago I stole 20 quid from you, or do you know what I mean? Like people suddenly reconnecting to that emotional center of themselves, or again reconnecting to that instinctual center and just going, you know, I'm gonna fuck quit my job. I'm done. I'm just done. I don't know what I'm gonna do. And then like 4 months later they're in a career that is the best thing that ever happened because they've listened to that intelligence. And I think that again, the fact that we're not speaking of these things, we're not trying to get ourselves to understand that there's more than just one narrative going on inside of us. And actually, if you're having conflicting thoughts and multiple narratives inside of you, that is not a sign of psychopathy necessarily at all. It's a sign of, I guess, an awakeness within yourself, that you are listening to these instincts, you know?
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, I was even thinking it's more of, it sounds like somebody that's an inquisitive nature, to have such a, so many different factors in life and to contemplate them all collectively. But I fully agree, Simpa. Like that's why I think psychedelics are fascinating, and I do believe, like when you touched on that about religion, they're talking about morality. Essentially, that's what the consistent theme seems to be. Take give or take. Frustratingly, I think the nature when we say religion, and I think there's too much tribal psychology that's attached to it, so people immediately go down to buzzwords in their head and stuff like that. I think that, like what you mentioned there about we're coming back to this, it's like like psychedelics are bringing us back to this internal spirituality where we're still searching existentially, but we're not leaning towards a theology or deity and these kind of things. It just strongly indicates towards human behavior, and that's what these on the surface of these religions, that's what they're saying. It's about the closest way to interact with the absolute, or with the consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. Like I think it's often called to, I think Aldous Huxley refers to it as the mind at large. I think he called it that. Like you've got the Kabbalion, they call it all is mind, and all these different things, all these different, again, cross-cultural elements, cross-factor things which lean towards a collective consciousness. It seems to be that in order to engage with that collective consciousness, it's human behavior. Human behavior is the interactive field in which you could interact. And I feel it's almost, if you look on a mathematical level as well, like what is the universe? The universe is a mathematical algorithm. That's what we're dealing with. It's like mathematicians have came across this information. We didn't invent maths, we discovered that the universe is made of mathematics. We are made of mathematics as well. We are like mathematical compounds, that biological compounds that are all walking around. And I think that's what's going on with your intuition and your ability to visualize. I think that's, and then you couple your intuition, your ability to visualize, with your language, which language obviously has a numerological value, is aware. And then obviously with the universe being a mathematical algorithm, it seems to be that there can be potentially a reciprocal relationship between the individual's actions and the fabric in which the universe is made of. And I know it sounds absolutely ridiculous, and a lot of people very often, when I say this kind of stuff, they're talking about, what about the tragedy in the world? And you've got children that are 3 or 4 and they've got cancer and they're dying and all these different things. And as cold as it sounds, there has got to be every form of variable on the spectrum of existence. So you can't have euphoria without blind tragedy. That's just the truth. And how is blind tragedy going to manifest itself in our physical existence? Through the most horrific circumstance possible. And then I think that allows the human to be distracted from the bigger picture because of this micro circumstance, which is obviously tragic, but it doesn't detach from the fact that inside that spectrum of existence, we still seem to be directional. There still seems to be this one direction, and we're all moving towards there. Cue the One Direction song.
You raise a really interesting point. I often bring it down to we almost live in a kind of a binary reality that expresses everything quantumly in between. So, you have, I suppose you can argue, of good and evil, you have right and wrong. But then there is the spectrum of existence between this. And then the perception of it changes where it lays on that spectrum. Mm-hmm. But it's all 360. They're not opposites. Everything, as we spoke of before about those bell curves meeting, in some way, the fundamentalists of the binary sides of an argument almost end up sharing such commonalities, because it's such ignorance and a blind faith towards it. I mean, this is what you see with, I guess, even some sort of militant atheists, that they have a faith that God doesn't exist. They're not going to do the legwork and try to come up with rational arguments, use logical debate, and be able to then take down theology and come up with a rational way of coming up to it. They have a faith that there isn't a God, which again, it then becomes a belief. And then if you don't want to look at it, science is then a belief, and it becomes a collective sort of thing. And I think this is why you end up with religious sort of saturation of cultures. Once an idea then takes hold, you then become a Christian society or a Muslim society or a Jewish society. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And I think that is true of then all of these other concepts. So it's then the collective beliefs of the people living in that population that then create, as you said before, the direction, the inclinations, and the actions of that culture. So then we can extrapolate from that we are in some way capable of changing the flow of culture. So you look at you or I, we have platforms and luckily, thankfully, shout out to all you people out there. Follow us.
High five, Simpa's fans.
Yeah. Shout out to your fans, man. Same. It's like, but people.
He's a good guy, my fan. Cheers, mate.
But people that want to engage in this kind of in this kind of content, people care. They want to expand their minds. They want to challenge and come up with new concepts. And so we are then acting as a free radical by choosing to do that. So even if we're kind of determined as part of the next step of the outcome, again, I almost come back to this thing of it almost doesn't matter, because if it's almost the same outcome. Do you know what I mean? Because if you then argue backwards that from now, everything that happened leading up to now was determined by everything that preceded it, because that's the correlatory flow of events, that then even if I did just now got up and jumped out the fucking window, in 3 months' time, we could say that deterministically that and that led to this. Do you know what I mean? So it almost becomes it's really hard to understand in motion, and it brings me the Søren Kierkegaard, the Swedish philosopher, said that life's got to be lived forward, but can only be understood backwards.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's a good. I'm familiar with his name, but I'm not familiar with any of his stuff. But yeah, I like that. That's good. Interesting you say that about the binary thing. I
think he's a Christian philosopher as well, actually.
Yeah. High five. That means nothing, not even a Christian. But I think when you said that about the binary thing, like what very often there's like when they say that thing, it's like almost a paradox in the world, where it's like, I know that there's like that spectrum of you can be an incompatibilist or a compatibilist or a determinist, and and you believe in free will. And it feels like inevitably both exist, it seems like. So we have the free will, if we're using that term, to pick up the cup and put it down again. But the deterministic element is whatever is going to be the consequence of that action. So inevitably, it's the same thing. It's like I'll choose to go to work today or choose to stay at home. But the deterministic element is, again, I'll be in the house the rest of the day if I stay at home and that kind of stuff. I think and again, when you're talking about that as well, about how it seems to always come back round and it's like a circular thing. Well, it kept popping to mind, the mandala. It's like a lot of the psychoanalysts when they do, or I don't know if they obviously still do that kind of thing, but certainly like Carl Jung did a lot of that, when it's like, he asked his patients, obviously again cross-culturally, to draw a mandala, and what he found was consistencies through his patients, and the consistencies were like symbolic representations of behavior or fears or desires and all these different things. And these were there should have been no correlation between the people, because some of these people were from like Far East Asia and some over in the West, so there shouldn't be this consistency. And what he found, what he essentially was a proponent of, is exactly that: the collective unconscious. There's a unifying field that we're all engaged in, and it seems to be that our consciousness is what's the mediating factor between these things, and it's just represented depending on the individual's subjective experience of life. But the consistent factors are the symbols, are the metaphors. These are the archetypes, because these are the primordial like residues of what like, I don't know if he would even say that it was like because of like behavior, to the extent of like, if you go all the way back to, I don't know, like these fucking cave times and stuff like that. But I don't know. I mean, I would be interesting to even look into some of these stuff to think at what point does that arrive? Like, what point is it? I don't know. At what point would the archetypes arrive in an evolutionary sense, if you were to go down that way?
I think
based on his theory.
Yeah, with to then take it and look at it in abstraction, I suppose. In that, the sort of time period that. It's almost like the function of then the earliest hominids of what we could then describe to be man, that would have what we would consider to be our consciousness. I'm air quoting there for my listeners instead of viewers. Then it's determined by very basic rules. So the need to eat, the need to allow for waste of the body, the need to keep warm in certain seasons, the need to keep cool in certain, to keep out of certain. So then we evolved to things of pigment in our skins that changed sort of the create a spectrum of complexion, I guess, of the way that our skin colors across the world dependent on UV exposure. So I think that then consequently over time our behavior then almost compounds, and then it becomes almost self-referential. So then we become a culture of, then you get taught cultural norms. So then you behave according to those cultural norms, but those cultural norms arose as a compounding of all of the previous behaviors. And I think if you were to go furthest back, I think that some of our oddest behavior is almost probably manifest of internal mechanisms. Mm-hmm. So if you think of it as there were billions of cells, you know what I mean, that are interacting in odd kind of ways, you see some of the graphics that they put up of things interacting in the body. Did you see the clip of is it a protein carrying, or something carrying a protein walking across a cell, and they made an animation of it, and it's got little legs and everything. And they showed all, and so you could see human behavior on the smallest scale, almost zoomed out. And so then once you then zoom up to our level, because we have far many more variables, far much more that we can do, our physics are not as limited as theirs in their reality, as it were, because of their scale, let's call it, in the same way that you would have a difference between, say, surface tension and gravity. So things under a certain size are then not contingently held to the rules of gravity. They're held to surface tension, the tension of the object that's then held by gravity. I don't know why I decided to clarify that point there.
No, it's dynamite, Simpa. Honestly, what you reminded me of, actually, when you were describing that there, is Terence McKenna describes that. He says, what is true on one level will be true on the next. And it seems to be when you're talking about the cells that are obviously essentially have legs, then you've come up to on a micro level, and you come up to the macro level, and here we are, these seemingly giant organisms in comparison, obviously, to the billions of cells that are present. You have that famous term, you know, as is above, so is below, you know, and again, it takes us back to that thing where you go all the way to the edge of the universe. The most in-depth, the deepest photo from the universe shows this swirling, the image that a lot of people will be familiar with, and then you go to the most intimate analysis of a molecule or an atom, and it looks identical to a universe. You know, it looks identical. So what is going on? What is the connection between these two things? And that just makes me believe that we're not even an aberration, but it's kind of like we're both, as a human being with consciousness, it's like consciousness gave us the ability to be a receptor and a transmitter of information, and it's just represented in our daily action. And I think that's what makes me think very often. And again, like I've individuals that kind of criticize me for this, but that's what makes me think that technology, even though it's caused a lot of connection, and we're able to do this kind of conversation, technology feels malevolent. Technology feels like it's there to steal your consciousness. That's what it feels like, because a lot of technology, and I don't know if it's just used malevolently or if it's just over because of capitalist consumerization, which has caused this hyper invasiveness of technology. But it certainly seems to be that the ability to intuit information from the universe, as our ancestors have mentioned have done, is being removed from human capacity because of like invasive technologies. Like, how often are you supposed to be able to intuit information if you're sitting there with, like, you've got your phone on the side, you've got the laptop at the side, and you're playing a game as well? It's going to be very difficult to do that, you know. So it's intriguing, you know, to see what the role of technology plays in this, you know, spectrum of inquiry.
It's interesting. I think that you're kind of right in that. I noticed the difference in sort of human behavior of learning phone numbers, for example. So I'm of a generation that I knew most people's mobile numbers. Yeah. I could literally have 30 plus mobile numbers in my head. Mm-hmm. Now somebody will... Rain Man. Yeah, no, I don't think that's that abnormal. I mean, most people would have several phone numbers for back. Yeah, no, definitely. You would, and you'd do it almost phonetically. So you'd almost sing it to yourself. You'd break it down in your own way, and you'd hold that information in your own way. And I think that mechanism of being able to go, I need to retain this, and the brain does something novel in its own way of doing it, I think that in and of itself is evidence that consciousness is almost a rebellion against determinism. That I think that the novelness of the brain, I think you see it in drunk people, actually. And I say this as someone that spent a lot of my youth being drunk. Mm-hmm. God, I'm wishing away my youth. I'm still young here. But yeah, so I don't know, just like randomly going, I'm going to go drop kick that fridge on the side of the road. Like, what determines that behavior in my head? What if it wasn't for then? I suppose that's determined by alcohol consumption. Never mind. But my point is that still then that our behaviors, our choices to then engage in drugs, to engage in certain behaviors, or to learn certain things, to move to certain areas, accept certain cultural norms, or certain take on and adhere to certain expectations of what people go, oh, well, you're a white man, so they should behave this way. You're a woman, you behave this way, et cetera, et cetera. To challenge that and to question that. And I think that for all technology is kind of disenfranchising us, it's also creating more random, I don't know what you'd call the world, like complete units. So because there's now more pieces, more options, it creates more whole outcomes. And I think so because of that, that's then, as we said, creating more, just generally more variables in the world. And I think that's why we're seeing such seemingly a breakdown in societal discourse. You're seeing whole swaths of communities that are now algorithmically limited from even knowing the other exists.
Yeah.
So all the people that are racist think everybody's racist because all of their social media shows them racist content.
Yeah.
Anyone that's anti-racist thinks everyone is anti-racist because, well, that's all that, do you know what I mean? So I think that those tools have ended up in one sense limiting us and determining our lives. But I think on the other, at any given moment, they have the power to change the world. You can literally just, I've got an idea, and most of us have done it, found ourselves going down a rabbit hole for 6-7 hours and learning about some shit. Yeah. Unless you've then been taught to discern that information, you can end up literally just programming yourself into somebody else's narrative. But if you then can do it with sort of a curious mind and I suppose, an open mind, but ultimately still take everything with a pinch of salt, you know what I mean? And double research everything before you believe anything. Yeah. Sort of mindset, then you can really learn a lot from the world. And that we've never had that before. If you suddenly were sat there on your couch getting high in the 70s or whatever, and you're like, oh, dude, with this thing, what about you'd have to go to a library or some shit, or you'd have to go find somebody in that field of knowledge who could know about that. So I think for all the deterministic entities of the world, I think it's a terrible way of me describing it, but the determinists of the world, I think, are using that technology to try to, again, create that narrow path of homogenization so that they can control and extrapolate cash and resource from the people. Whereas I think the free radicals, they don't know what they're trying to do, but they're trying to do it. And it's just to tear anything to tear that apart. And I think that those two systems are very telling of what's happening of the universe as a whole, which is its tendency towards order and atrophy. So things seek towards energy efficiency, towards simplicity, but at the same time are constantly destroying and regenerating. And I think that process almost feels like it's speeding up. With more information we have, the faster things are falling apart. You know, you've got now the conversation going on in the world around gender roles. You've got within my lifetime basically quite a ubiquitous acceptance of LGBTQ individuals in the world, you know, written into a lot of laws, and they're starting to really gain ground. Civil rights have moved on in a lot of places. And I think that, it's creating that wider space for then change begets change. But then previously we could almost determine what it was going to change into because we could control what was changed. Do you know what I mean? I think this is what we're seeing with the co-opting of things like literally cops. You know what I mean? It's all sponsored by energy companies, and it's not. So they're presenting themselves as that solution. They're trying to determine their future. But we're the free radical generation, and I don't mean that in the sense of our age bracket. I mean in the time that we're living now, people from all walks of life using things like cannabis, psychedelics, or even just gathering and communing together or building alternative community models, are seeking within themselves whether they want to call it God, enlightenment, knowledge, awareness. I think that more people than ever are now trying to awaken themselves to themselves, to not just go, why am I living this way? Oh, it's because I think this because my country is majority Christian. I think this way because my government made the laws this way. I think this way because I was taught this 15 years ago, sort of thing. So I think that, anything we can do to proliferate cannabis and entheogenic compounds and psychedelics is a very, very good thing.
Fully agree, Simpa. Honestly, I like that. Honestly, that was a beautiful statement, man. He says that consciousness is a rebellion to determinism. All it made me think really was like, what if it's the observer of it? What if it's the determinism is the piece of art, the consciousness is the observer of that? Again, side note as well, I thought obviously we're talking about like earlier on about a collective consciousness and this unifying element in human psyche, and I was thinking about the cloud. No, the internet. It's like, if that's not an empirical example of a collective consciousness of sorts, I don't know what is. You know, again, it brings under the microscope of the level of malevolence behind it, because as you've mentioned perfectly, you know, these pieces of technology have enhanced our ability to have these conversations. I mean, if we were to go back to the 70s, as you mentioned, like we'd never be like, you'd have maybe one Aristotle book and you maybe have to search fucking 4 or 5 times over to try and find somebody that knows something about another one, you know, whereas now you can listen to lectures. I mean, it'd be interesting to see how much of a like statistical difference it is learning through YouTube than it would be through some other, even just if you were to say university and take away the holidays and take away these bits and pieces, because I think it's, let's say, everybody refers to YouTube, but they don't really regard it as a source of information because, as you mentioned earlier, it's algorithmically determined. So it's like the level of true learning you're going to get from it is going to be subjective based on your previous browser history.
But that's, again, to go to the consciousness being a rebellion against determinism. If the algorithm is trying to determine what you see, you can still try and, I suppose, yes, and I'm trying to prove my own point here, but you can almost then you can go left of it. So I do it all the time on my Spotify, for example, really freak it out. So all of a sudden I'll just go, I had this country tune like 10 years ago I want to listen to, and stick down it. And then all of a sudden go down a rabbit hole of connected sort of sidebar bits, and then deliberately choose to go, there's a trance track from Germany that I want to listen to. And it then goes, here's your next week's worth of music. And I'm not interested in that because that's not then what I'm feeling. Yeah. So it's then...
So you're trying to cover yourself from listening to Britney Spears, is that what you're doing here?
Hey, actually, I do have a punk version from the Punk Goes Pop album of some punk band doing a Britney song. So yeah, I will admit guilt to that one.
All the names to have.
but no, it's interesting though, because those algorithms of the way they're trying to determine this, but then they're also making themselves obsolescent. So this is something the platforms are seeing, is people are leaving in droves from certain social media platforms and things like even YouTube because they feel limited to it. They feel that literally it's there's the same 20 songs, the same 5 artists. These are the same 4 creators, even though I follow 450 people or whatever. Yeah. And so they can end up then getting frustrated by it and removing themselves sort of from it. And I think that then that again is that free radical element. I think obviously it becomes difficult to anyone that's managed to quit Facebook, I think will tell you this, to actually remove yourself from that feeling of interconnectivity, of being intimately involved in the lives of others, that you're always invited to the party. You know what I mean? You always get to be in the know and you're forever, caught up with the gossip, as it were. And then you feel alienated and isolated from it. But then you rebuild these real world connections and you understand that physiological feeling of connection that exists beyond the hyper connection that we have of just words, of just images, the superfluous and quite full connection that social media creates. I think our brain knows the difference. I truly do. And I think that to go back to the point of your question, whether there would be almost a difference between learning in the physical realm of going to university in the sense that you do the whole experience. So you go to the clubs, you go on the night out, you live in the dorms, as it were, and you have that experience, because then you're learning more than just the knowledge within that subject. But I think that's part of the determinist's plan, as it were. I'm speaking crudely here, but I think you know what I'm saying.
I know what you mean, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, again, then a lot of people go to university with this idea of, I'm going to be the rebel, I'm going to be the one that breaks out. And then 10 years later, they're in a corporate job on Wall Street. and do you know what I mean? I think so we're in such an interesting world where the determinists have created this path of going, no, you still need to go to university. You need to get all these letters after your name. You need to have all of this shit in this framework. While some of the richest people in the world are high school, college dropouts, you know what I mean? They never got the accreditations. They saw that it wasn't for them, and they went and blazed their own trail. Yeah. And you know what I mean?
I was going to say, if we're even to zoom out for that dynamic of like a deterministic society that's been shaped by individuals, if we zoom all the way out, the reason why I actually believe in determinism above and beyond anything else is because essentially, like, that's what the nature of nature is sustainability. That's what that is. So it's like nature's going to produce, and I think very often science kind of, the progress in science has kind of detached us from our rightful place on the earth, really, where we actually should know that we are, was like that we think that we are like we've spontaneously separated ourselves from the laws of nature, in the sense that we're like and I think climate change and these kind of things obviously compound these stuff. But I don't think that nature would produce anything that knew that it would eventually kill itself. I don't think that. So I believe, and it sounds bizarre, I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with this, but all the stuff that's going on in the world, that's the level of determinism. That's what this is. Like, nature is watching us, and it's like, the fact that we think that we're in control is like a child thinking it's telling its mum and dad what to do. That's what it feels like, you know, and that's what makes me believe that then every consequential thing, even on a micro level of human interaction, societal frameworks, local communities, all these different other things, the way these things are structured are just micro representations of this macro element that's present. So yeah, it's really interesting, and I think it's like that thing, you know. It's like it's like once you're chopping wood, you're fucking chopping wood, you know. It's like, you know, chop wood, carry water, that kind of stuff.
There is so much thought on this. There are so many people that have dedicated their entire lives to thinking of it, and it's good to think about. It's interesting to think about, but ultimately, your life will still be shaped by forces external to yourself. And I think that it, as we kind of alluded to with the start of it, that it almost kind of doesn't matter. I think that the best thing that you can try and do, any of us can try and do, is be sincere and genuine to ourselves, is to try to reconnect with the three states of consciousness and of intelligence, as it were. And I think that part of what's really given me comfort and the ability, in most instances, I still fuck up, don't get me wrong, to accept the reality of others, to accept that they are living a world and their beliefs are their beliefs and their ideas are their ideas and their behaviors are their own. Because, as I said before, if I was born them, raised them, lived as them, I would be them. And I think being able to truly accept that and remind myself of that makes living in this reality, not knowing whether I have the ability to do anything truly of my own, a lot easier, a lot more comfortable. And I think that could be argued to be a religious ideal. It just doesn't have a deity. It doesn't have necessarily a moral structure to it. I guess it has ethics that arise from it. But I think that's what we should all seek to do, is find the God within, find the religious within, and create our own rules, not to be rigid and to be, you know, punishing of ourselves when we violate or break them, and then to force them on others, but to find our own meaning and purpose in the everyday. You know what I mean? I think that whether you choose to find that in determinism or religious belief or ideal or in any concept, whatever it manifests in your mind as, I think that's true. I think it's shit of anyone to try and disbelieve it. I think this is one of the things I love about the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. That was basically just incorporated. It was just created as a kind of, well, no, we've done all the same things every other religion has done. You know what I mean? It's the like Pastafarians as well, like with the way the colanders on the heads and stuff. And
ridiculous.
Oh yeah, but because again, people are challenging it, or like the Church of Satanism in America, and people are trying to, I think in some way, whether they recognize it or not, they are free radicals as part of a much larger system, as we said before, they're trying to shake shit up. They're trying to move us forward. And I think it's, if anything, we are determined by the intelligence, inclinations of the earth, ultimately, in some way. That's the only abstract way I can think of it, is exactly that you said, that every time the problem arises, nature creates a solution. So we found that in, say, mycelium that eats industrial waste. There's certain worms they've discovered in landfills that are eating plastic. You know what I mean? It adapts, it evolves, it changes and fluctuates, and tides come and go, as it were. And I think that part of the human experience is we need to recognize our own hubris and our own ignorance and arrogance, that we know so much. We have literally opened the book, we're on page 1 and gone, what is that? That's a letter. What does the letter say? And we're going, we've got it. We've figured all this shit out. We've got it. We don't know fucking shit. I'm sorry, but we do not know anything. And it still perplexes me that I meet people sometimes that have never had that overwhelming, almost terrifying experience of not knowing anything, almost cripplingly so. Of like, I get it sometimes with the most mundane of shit. Like seriously, like the other day in the bathroom, looking at a shower bowl, and just thinking of the process that went into, looking at the words on the back of it, of the language and the compounds that went into it, of the labs and the people's life, and just the endless complexity of it, for this to arrive for something to just clean hair.
Yeah.
And the absurdity of it, the absolute absurdity of it. And trying to explain that sort of to my missus sometimes.
Do you know what's cool about that, Simpa, man? I can see how you think, man. Like, that's fucking cool, because that's what I get you. That's essentially that's the psychedelic experience. You look at something and it goes boom. There's like, I'm doing this. I'm actually doing like a book actually, and it's called Philosophy of an Average Man, and I'm going to be doing it over the course of 10 years. I'm about 2 years in, maybe about 7,000 or 8,000 words in, something like that. And it's just it's essentially. Like a respect to Marcus Aurelius with his book Meditations, and which is just statements and paragraphs and stuff. I'm sure you're familiar. So I was like, I read that and I was overwhelmed. I was like, this is fantastic. So I wanted to do something similar, because what that book is just him intuitively bringing out information and just documenting it down, essentially. So I was like, well, we all have the capacity, we can all do it. And in the book, I've got a thing where it says there's actually 2 points, which is quite perfect. The way you're describing that about the shower head, the shower bottle, and the in-depth creation of this thing just to get to this almost seemingly futile fucking end result. It's like in the book I've wrote, it's like the more you focus on a single point, the more that single point becomes more complex. Right, and that seems to be true, and it's like that's one of the things. And just to go back on that thing when you mentioned about, it's like, what's the point in all this and that kind of thing. Again, I think it's maybe 1.8, 1.9 I've marked it in the book, and I've got a thing about, because I was sitting there thinking this as well, like, what if I'm wrong, man? What if all this shit is bullshit? And what I came up with was, I was like, philosophy is, well, what is philosophy? Is it intellectual curiosity or existential masturbation? And that's what it is, man, because it's like, let's be honest. And the reason I say this is I actually came up with that after I'd spent, my brother, he's doing his PhD in chemistry. So he is like the polar opposite to what I'm talking about here. He's like 100% empirical, but it's brilliant because he's open to listen, and obviously we engage and all that. And I very often, essentially, every time I meet him, every time I see him and we're talking about this kind of thing, I have that feeling that you described of, I know fucking nothing. I could be at fault here. I could be empty with all this pish. And I could just be like, I'm walking away. So I constantly walk away from his company because he's extremely articulate and he's very knowledgeable. So I walk away from his company often feeling wounded. I could often feel like shit, man. So I spend a lot of time nurturing my internal pathetic beliefs. But I think that's maybe what the game is. What is this game? It's just try and figure out as much as you can, apply it in a holistic and benevolent manner to as many people as you can in order to live a fruitful and peaceful life. That should be anybody's aspiration, really.
Yeah, I think that's what I appreciate about Zen Buddhism and the pursuit of satori, of brief and sudden enlightenment that just sort of arises and passes. And it kind of we capture it in our daily lives. I quite enjoy washing up because I find that I can get into a real Zen state with it. You have an automatic muscle memory and an intrinsic understanding of how to do this. You've got sensory input from the temperatures of the water, and you've got the ability for sort of, if you chose for your mind to kind of wander. I choose to use it as a space of meditation and to try and sort of pass with it. And then there'll be moments where I go, I'm washing up. And the celebration that goes off in my brain and the kind of neurological woof of like, for a moment, I was just stood here washing up. I wasn't anything. I wasn't in the future. I wasn't in the past. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't depressed of either state. I was truly present. And I think that this is what the pursuits of Buddhism speaks really highly of it. Obviously, Jainist that preceded that as well. Of the even sort of, I spent most of the religions do with the way you live, then determines the quality of your life as you go. So that obviously if you eat well, you rest. You're good to others. You build good company. You keep good company. You'll feel better. And I think that's kind of the ultimate truth of the individual, is you have to find what that is. I can't tell you what that is, nor can any other individual. I think, what is it, Terence McKenna said? He said, avoid gurus, follow plants.
That's right, yeah.
And I think that's why there is this revolution in Renaissance of drugs in general in the world, of this interest, this true interest of where it's not about managing something. We can truly change something. And I think the powerful revelatory ability of something like DMT to, in an hour, completely erase bigotry, completely change people's ignorance on certain things. I mean, I've been lucky enough to trip sit quite a lot of people on DMT and watch them come back and have this kind of just watching. You can kind of see almost like a download in their head as they're trying to come to terms with certain things. And I think that it is this again, that connecting of the consciousness. I mean, some people speak of it as like an unblocking. If you were to then look at it as like water and plumbing between the systems, and it's a good analogy, I guess, for it. And then once that's kind of cleared out, that flow of information goes through. And I think you see this in people when they've had a psychedelic experience, that in the weeks and months afterwards, they have a glow. I think I described it on the BBC about talking about LSD as a positive hangover, of just kind of like, especially the first day after I have a big psychedelic experience, my brain, as it's kind of rebooting and restarting, it's in such a peaceful and accepting setting. It is this is where my life is. All right, I've got maybe new goals, new ideals, some novel new concepts to kind of meditate on and think about into the future. But ultimately, it's I don't know. It feels like a rebirth. And I think that's what, the more I've had a psychedelic experience, it's the paradox of it. When I first started with psychedelics and I had really heavy experiences, I came to this idea of determinism, because if you zoomed out large enough, you can see how everything is interconnected. But then that's only as a snapshot. If we were to think of it then as the time moves that image, it changes. So then I think of like the paradox of the British coast, when it came to measuring the British coast, and there's an anecdote here that I'm going to butcher, but basically they had to work an approximation of it, of a calculation, because actually the more you looked, the larger it would become. Right. Because if you then say drew a straight line here and it was a meter, but actually it went in nooks and crannies, you could go in an extra 3 meters. Then if you went down from, say, centimeters down to millimeters, you could keep adding more millimeters. Then, do you know what I mean? So it
Mandelbrot set, really?
Yeah. And then the coastline changes over time because of the tide change. And so it almost feels like determinism can't work in a continually moving reality, or it's only ever determining the next moment. It's almost like there can't be an end point. Do you know what I mean? So it's everything that is being determines the next thing, but then the next thing could still be a free radical, as it were, acting upon it, that then changes what that direction was slightly or dramatically, but then it starts a new chain of determinism. Do you know what I mean?
Really understand. Yeah, definitely, man. Yeah, what you remind me of, really, I don't know if it's the right word, but entropy. The nature of the universe expanding. That's what that sounds like. The more you inquire, the more you continuously push forward, the more complex that thing becomes. And it sounds like it would make perfect sense for that to be the case on a micro level. If what physicists are describing is that's exactly what's going on the macro level, on like the universe, the galaxy, all that exists is essentially doing the exact same thing.
Yeah. Wow. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I'm quite intrigued that we are so quite prominent within cannabis and spend all of our lives talking about cannabis, but we spent basically the past 2 hours talking about physics, philosophy, religious.
Has cannabis even been mentioned? It's been in the background.
I suppose then we should. We'll do some cannabis questions up in here.
Nice one.
Yeah. Yeah, man. No. See, again, I feel you were talking about before about feeling sort of wounded from sometimes with your brother of having intellectual conversations. Yeah. I think I feel invigorated already from this conversation, because I can kind of feel my brain going off in all different directions. It's adding the new information. And I think that mechanism is something we need to find, how we incentivize that within ourselves, how we reawaken our childlike curiosity and our intrigue into the world. So instead of it becoming a chore, going, I don't want to learn something new, I've got everything I need, it becomes, something new. And you get that feedback, that visceral, physical feedback. I think if we can figure out a way to bring that into the world.
Perfect. Simpa, definitely. Interestingly, there's actually a study they did about the opposite of that, which would be interesting, because if you just flip it around, we would do exactly what you're proposing here. So essentially, what this study implies in the context of this conversation is that the stepping away from tribalism opens the doors for greater understanding about what's possible. And in this study, what they did was they brought in the participants, 20 or so. They didn't tell the participants it was ethically sound. They didn't tell them the specific intention of the study. And what the study was to show the neurochemical responses of the conversation. And what they did was that they brought in individuals of opposing religions and got them to talk about their lives, but they were told individually, exclude, don't, like, you will be told when you could then mention what your religion is. So the individual talking 10, 15 minutes or so, and the brain obviously all wired up and all connected. And the part of the brain, obviously, which escapes me at the moment, which is responsible for receptiveness to new information, was completely active. It was completely open, and it was ready to go. And the moment that the individuals mentioned which religious orientation that they favoured, that on a physiological level shut down. Exactly, man. And that's so immediately, just based on a tribal approach, suggests strongly, because that's what that is, let's be honest, religion, sport, all these things, this is a tribalist connection to something, and it could even be obviously to your opinion or that kind of thing, but it seems, the point I'm making is it seems to be, in order to encourage embracing the possibility for new or novel, seems to be to always remain humble that you really don't know anything, and what anything's out there can be possible. And I think that's why often, like I mentioned, talking to my brother, I love talking to him, because very often I find myself there's something innate inside me that believes in this metaphysicality and determinism and a God and a universal consciousness, because every time I try and force myself to believe what he's saying, and he's very convincing, I can't feel it internally. There's something inside me that is pre-designed, it feels like, and I'm sure obviously I get critical for that use of words, but it seems that way. It seems like there's something that's innate in all of us, and again, if we're to look at that on a micro level and a macro level, what does that suggest? That suggests, like, individually, if we're all made up of not all opposing factors, but certainly a large spectrum of opposition, which would allow a relationship of movement. That's what that is, let's be honest. And that's what we're talking about here. On a macro level, the universe is moving, and then you come all the way down to a micro level of human interaction. Our core beliefs are the representation of the opposing element. It is the hot and the cold, based on the fact that it's like Muslim or Christian or those kind of things, or atheist and a religious individual. These are, and again, it's like Terence McKenna says, it seems to be that what is true on one level of existence is repeatable across all levels. That's what it seems to be. So if there's and what I mean by that is, like, if there is a dichotomy that exists on a cellular level, which there is, the positive and negative charges, these kind of things, if that dichotomy exists on that cellular level, you better believe that it's going to exist on the macro level, on a universal level, on a that large scale level, and how it will be represented will be up for inquiry, really, to figure out how it's represented correctly, because that's what it feels like. And it just feels like whatever, it's almost like you could figure out the meaning of life just by studying the movement of a cell. That's what this feels like.
Yeah, exactly. It feels that if life is a quantum fractal, to butcher it, but to create
not at all, that's perfect.
But to create a visual in my own mind, I guess. The study of any component of it would reveal the truth of the rest of it if you understood the mechanics of it. And I think this is where people like Elon Musk are sort of arriving with this idea of going the uninhibited and allowed to continue at a scale of growth. Humanity could arrive at a point of acquiring all knowledge, but it would then it's on the paradox of you then create new knowledge. So it would never truly work. You could then create an apparatus to hold the knowledge, but then all you would effectively do is move consciousness from the physical world into a digital realm. And I think that the fact that is then possible is to then suggest that human consciousness is, the argument is that it's not obviously defined in the human body. And if you look at, again, the Akashic idea of the vaults, that then it's time and consciousness are intrinsically interwoven in some way that I don't think we quite yet understand. I think Einstein was the closest to get there with considering time space as physical, and the way he sort of described the weight of the planets affecting time space that then creates the physical rules for everything to operate within under our current, kind of still under our current understanding of the way the universe operates. Obviously, string theory and quantum mechanics and stuff like that kind of works, kind of doesn't with Einstein's sort of rules, as it were. But yeah, it's a fucked up time that we're at, because to come back to you and your brother, I feel that you're both right and you're both wrong.
Of course, definitely.
And it's the same that's true with everything. And I think that's where we need to get to, is that our continuation of being one thing causes another thing. So in as you're saying, that if you are, you can be a Christian, but you don't have to just be a Christian. But by being just a Christian, you create opposition in of the dichotomies. You strengthen the binary and the polarizing space between things. Whereas if you then can just go onto the zoom out enough to go, we're all human, and treat everyone on that level, and then use the other information to determine how they may respond to things or what they might be interested in, etc., rather than as a prejudgment, I think you would stop that neurological trick that you were talking about before, where the brain then just goes, oof. Because I think there's more prejudices than ever before that people can hold. They go, what's your sexual orientation? Oh, shut down. What's your views on this? Oh, shut down. Climate change? Oh, shut down. What's your nationality? Shut down. How do you vote on Brexit? Shut down. You can see it. And I think this is why we've ended up with these polarizing, or at least two polarizing sides to every argument, these false dichotomies. And most people lie in the bell curve in the middle, but because they're not represented, because they can't unify enough to create one thing that would stand between them, there is no true centralist position, I guess, across the spectrum of anything that manifests in human behavior. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, even the yin and the yang, that the symbol of that immediately shows that kind of thing. Perfectly when you said that though as well, like obviously both of us being right and both being wrong, it's like I couldn't agree more. That book I'd mentioned before about the philosophy of an average man, I did it yesterday, man, the very last, and I was just sitting here thinking about this kind of stuff, and that's what I came up with was that, you know, the very last one I wrote was last night, and it was, the statement was, when you become comfortable in the knowledge that you've gained, you're most likely to be wrong, you know, and that's essentially because when you get to that stage of comfort and security in the knowledge you have, there is more of a chance that you're going to be, it's going to be dogmatic, it's going to be erroneous, you know, that kind of thing. Sorry, I'm going to put this plug on 1 minute, Simpa. I'll put this plug on.
Yeah. Nice little interlude.
Sorry, man.
No, it's good. It allows my brain to sort of catch up there. It's...
Which actually takes, if we're to talk about cannabis then, if we're to go back to that, I mean, what is, we're talking about the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system underpins all of human physiology. Therefore, there must be some element of consciousness arising from the endocannabinoid system. This revolution in cannabis now becoming at the forefront of what seems to be human society is now grasping it. The only thing that I find, and I'd be interested to see what you think about this, man, is that we are in a capitalistic society, obviously, give or take the varying elements of stock market manipulation and all these different things. On the bones of it, it's capitalist based. So is it inevitable that we're going to be, is it inevitable that I'm going to be an old guy sitting in my 60s moaning at my son for having his Starbucks cannabis? Is that what's going to be happening, do you think, when it's just going to be that scenario where it's like, I remember it used to be a fucking unknown strain, underweight, we used to be what we used to get, that kind of shit?
Yeah, seeds and sticks.
Yeah, seeds and sticks.
It's an interesting one, yeah, because it kind of then, it follows on from the other thing of false dichotomies.
Yeah.
So we live under a reality right now, whether it be in Scotland, whether it be in Spain, England, America, Australia, India, whatever, the determinists, as it were, to use that same sort of construct, they have been living large in their industries, in their worlds, and cannabis is the ultimate free radical. And ubiquitous legalization, as in the ability to legally procure and consume cannabis globally, I think is going to happen as an inevitability. I think nothing can change that. I think there is enough momentum and enough free radicals and ever more free radicals created by the presence of those that they will metastasize into an entity that is capable of then changing the system at large. How long they take to then gather together to actually share a commonality that isn't broken by false dichotomies, I think is going to take a very long time. I mean, California's been legal for several years now, had medical for many more, and had a culture of cultivation and industry for a hell of a long time. Yet now they're only starting to have this conversation about, well, actually legalization is actually just Prohibition 2.0. How many thousands of people are still getting arrested? How many people are you raiding? Why are you burning 500,000 plants? Why are you tearing down that? This is not what you've sold us. So I think that if those elements accelerate in other markets that are further ahead of us, I think that before those determinists could control the industry and create an enterprise that would mean that people like Shell, Exxon, Starbucks, McDonald's, Budweiser, British American Tobacco own the industry and operate it all, that enough fundamental changes will happen to the political system. And I think you're already starting to see this in the regions where cannabis is becoming some form legalized or acceptable in trades and being taxable. You've then seen changes in other drug policy. You've seen changes in sort of psychedelic research. You've seen changes in the culture. Free education has often come into the agenda. Homelessness has been tackled far more efficiently. You know, it really does affect more proliferal systems. So I think that as these evidence bases develop, my sincere hope is that before true globalization can kick off, enough people arise to the idea that if we give cannabis to the globalist capitalists, we miss a lot of the potential of cannabis to give the people autonomy of their lives. Mm-hmm. You know, we don't want mega warehouses growing weed in Australia to then export it around the world, creating a carbon footprint that dwarfs the carbon that was sequestered by the cultivation of the cannabis. Mm-hmm. So I think that as more people, like even on the micro scale, you and I, all the way up to the Steve D'Angelos and that of the world, that people are rebelling against the status quo. They're rebelling against those determinists and saying that no, our lives and our futures are not set. They're not written yet. We have this ultimate tool that gives us the chance to set our future. It's also given us an opportunity to be more introspective of ourselves, of society. And I think that again is evident in what I've just spoke of with the free education and the progress societally in the areas and regions that have legalized or decriminalized or allowed cannabis.
I couldn't agree more, Simpa, honestly. And I think that to push the actual, to maintain control, home grow, that's what you're looking at. That's like, you have to be able to cultivate your own medicine, you can grow your own potatoes, you can grow your own carrots. Cannabis is of the same factor. It's just a miraculously superior plant. That's what that is compared to those things. I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal compared to, I mean, you know as well as anybody, the phytochemical complexity that cannabis holds is unlike anything else on the planet. You know, there is something unique about cannabis. There's something that cannabis is here to do for us. And we have absolutely just shunned it like the fucking uninvited person at the party, you know, sit in the corner where you're not wanted anymore. And as a consequence of that, we've seen the consequences we're engaged with, you know, like COP26, the climates and all that kind of thing, the fact that the level of food is substandard because of the fact that if we're to input hemp foods and all these different things, that will be beneficial. So yeah, definitely, I think, you know, to prevent the full, I mean, let's be honest, if there is going to be that element, there is going to be a corporatized element. Yeah. It's already present at the moment, but I think it's at the very least it's for the good. At least instead of it, you mentioned Shell and you know, Budweiser and stuff like that. Instead of it being poisonous, toxic substances they're promoting, it's cannabis now. And I do think sometimes like it was actually, I don't know, maybe it was a good thing that it was prohibited, that because of the fact that if it hadn't been, then it would have been controlled before now. You know, we might not have this circumstance where we've been able to discard the endocannabinoid system, and it does feel potentially, again, sorry everybody, but deterministic.
Well, yeah, what does it say? You don't know what you've got till it's gone. Yeah, and I think whether you could argue it was a good thing or not, I think unfortunately, again, if you're looking at it on the very unemotional level of the deterministic approach, then yeah, but obviously the suffering and everything else that is caused by the consequences, I don't think they're irreversible. Yeah. I think that we are capable of actually utilizing that which was denied from us to fix these things. And I agree that Trev Coleman has a quote on this that I think is always very apt. And he says, "Hey, Trev, on yourself." Shout out to Trev, wherever you are in the world this evening. And he says that cannabis is a capitalist resource with a socialist agenda. So they may capitalize it as a resource. They may commodify it. They may grow trillions of plants of it and make trillions more pounds, dollars, whatever your chosen denomination. But in the process of doing that, they are going to purify the air. They are going to purify, or if done correctly, they could purify the air. They could detoxify soils. They could renutrify soils. They could prevent deforestation. They could prevent desertification. They could create future desalinization, energy production, remove toxins from plastics, as you were saying before, create truly recyclable and closed loop systems. We could create a carbon sink economy. There's so much potential in that. But if done incorrectly, we would still live in indentured servitude. Most people would still have to work more hours than their body can give them healthily, that then denies them the ability to create meaningful relationships in their lives, to pursue meaningful hobbies, and to learn, to sit with a book, to be curious enough and have the time to go down a rabbit hole in YouTube and learn new things, you know, to not be forced through living in a system to become lethargic and apathetic and detached and disenfranchised from the world and just bitter and slower and more just sedentary and just a passive consumer of the world. And I think that cannabis, if we're not careful, will become a new form of just new alcohol. It will be everywhere, and it will, I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily, but I think that the unconscious consumption of it and the unconscious production of it, in terms of then not utilizing every part of it, instead of creating vertically integrated companies that then maximize profit, they should be maximizing productivity, minimizing impact. We shouldn't be living for what we can do in terms of our excess, the ever taller skyscraper, the ever more excessive yacht, or whatever fucking larger size container ship. You know what I mean? We shouldn't be celebrating these excesses. They are not milestones of human achievement. They are symbols of our failure. The fact that we need to import a fruit that could be grown in the UK from a developing country because the labor is cheaper, but in the carbon we destroy the planet. We're chasing the wrong ends. And I think that if only the Starbucks of the world are allowed to proliferate, then our future is very much determined to be the continuation of the status quo now, with just basically alcohol will get phased out and tobacco will get phased out and cannabis will just replace it in all forms.
Yeah. I fully agree, Simpa. Honestly, that was really well said. And you know, one of the things I often think, where it's like one of the negatives of cannabis is that it's like, obviously the same with like friends and stuff like that, it's the same thing. It's like cannabis is glorified with the quantity that's consumed. That's what it feels like. And it feels like that's kind of disrespectful to it. It feels like that. That's why, I mean, I'll be honest, what's like this year has been fucking grim. So it's kind of, my smokings went down as the stresses went up. And what I've noticed is that it's like the less I consume, the more I experience the sensation when I actually consume cannabis. You know what I mean? It's like, you actually feel the impact, and it feels like if we're to be respectful to the plant itself, you should never get to the point of consumption unless it's medically like legitimate, unless you have to suppress pain or psychological trauma or anything like that. You know, and again, everybody to their own, by the way. I'll shout that out, like, fucking hell, if you want to get ripped to your skull, cool, man, everybody does that shit. I'm the same. Yeah, definitely. Like, there is a Friday night, let's be honest. But I think that to approach it like we did in our teens, like, just the more you can consume as the end goal, I think is disrespectful to what we've came to know about cannabis. You know, cannabis has, like we mentioned before, a unique interaction physiologically. There is nothing else that interacts with everything else in your body. The endocannabinoid system is this network, this matrix of structure right over your whole body, and cannabis binds to that perfectly, you know, interacts with that. So I think it's there's still so much to learn from cannabis, but I think as a consequence of that, in individuals, I think this is where what happens as well. You mentioned that about the introspective ability. When individuals don't smoke cannabis and then they do, they learn more about themselves. They learn more about like what their insecurities are, or what their strengths are, or they learn more about, oh shit, like you mentioned before, like shit, maybe I shouldn't have done that the other day, or maybe I should do that to help that person, you know. And I think that's the more and more we inquire about cannabis as the years go on, the more we'll actually learn about ourselves as a species.
Yeah, so I think even if Starbucks take over the world for 10, 20, 30 years, I think the free radicals of each generation will arise, and they will accrue the knowledge of each previous generation. They will hopefully review the works of you and I when we're hundreds and thousands of episodes deep. You know what I mean? And I think they will then add to that. They will then digest that, hopefully discern what is true, apply that to what is then true, given the updated information and knowledge of their times. But hopefully then just carry that same torch of the ideals that I think has been shared throughout humanity, and people have been put to death for it, people have been imprisoned for it, people have been ostracized and demonized and removed from communities and had their lives cut short. It's to prevent this idea of other creating, of anything that is outside of that deterministic, homogenized experience. And I think that the controls that exist because of the vested interests of the venture capitalists in our neoliberalistic society, it feels often deterministic. And I think that they weaponize concepts like God, and they're trying to now co-opt cannabis and psychedelics from us to be able to tell us, no, this is how you take it, in a way that they can then determine our outcome from it. So rather than having these revelatory experiences and suddenly going, I'm going to go to India and join a monastery, or do whatever, and people have these radical changes and decide to go and do something, that is an unquantifiable issue within their mathematical arrangement and understanding of society.
Yeah.
And so I think that they'll forever continue to try and restrict it. And we're seeing this in regions where they've already, air quotes, legalized it, where they're trying to reduce the potency caps. They're trying to control homegrown numbers. They're trying to control farmers markets, social spaces where it can be consumed, put arbitrary limits on things. You know what I mean? They're still trying to ensure that they can determine every single outcome of cannabis, but the quantum nature of cannabis, the wonderful thing is the culmination of all of those phytocannabinoids, you know, flavonoids, terpenes, all the sequester terpenes, all the minor terpenes, all of the other proliferal compounds, hundreds of them, they culminate together in this act of beautiful rebellion that causes the consumer to just do something, I don't know, just different, just different. And I think that anything that leads to difference allows for proliferation of a space where difference is accepted. Do you know what I mean? And I think that cannabis does this wonderfully, because I have shared joints with people from every creed and background, from every, well, not every ethnicity, but quite a lot of wide, diverse group of ethnicities, of races, of different class backgrounds. And the commonalities when we're sat rolling that joint, all those things disappear. You are two individuals sat down about to consume cannabis. And then the conversations that flow from that, you gain certain understandings and insight and a deeper sense of knowledge of yourself, of others, a humbling that there are things out there that you don't know. And I think that's one of the cannabis, it kind of pushes us towards other people and to try to be more social as a part of that. I think it's a reawakening of that mechanism of curiosity.
Yeah. Honestly, I fully agree, Simpa. And interestingly, when you're just talking about it, like we seek different, and cannabis, obviously, as you just mentioned there, like when you're interacting with people, it encourages you to be curious. There's actually, again, if we were to go back to the studies, science proves this now. It's like, obviously, the endocannabinoid system does everything essentially, so it's inevitable it's going to have this impact. But like when you consume cannabis, cannabis directly increases cerebral blood flow to your frontal lobe, and your frontal lobe is the active part of your brain which is largely responsible for creative thinking. So it's not an accident that when individuals consume cannabis, it makes me creative. It's because the region of your brain has actually become more accessible to blood flow, which encourages that kind of stimulated thought. So, and that's it perfectly highlights what you're saying, that on a camaraderie basis, you're sharing a joint with somebody. It's a social interaction, yeah, but on a neurochemical level, you're actually enhancing your ability to learn just with the person you're sitting with and by the chemical. And you take what you mentioned earlier about alcohol, you share a beer with somebody and you're not going to be having much philosophical thinking. There's not going to be much going on. You're going to, I don't know, the primal regions of the brain is going to be active. You know, the main sensors of the primal regions of the limbic system are going to be the main things that are going to be at play just as a result of alcohol. So it's exciting that cannabis is now, I mean, it always has been, but it seems more mainstream now. It seems more like it's becoming more socially acceptable. I mean, a good example of this is I've got a friend who's a doctor, and she, like 2 years ago, when I first met her, chatting away and stuff like that, and I was talking about cannabis, obviously, as I always do, and I was talking about stuff, and that's when I wrote the book, actually, A Case for Cannabis, and I gave it to her because obviously I was intrigued to see what she'd think of it. And I never really heard very much back. And I was like talking to her and stuff like that about cannabis, and I could just see the look in her face of like, yeah. Like it's like somebody trying to convince you that their team's the best team. You know, that's what it kind of looked like. And that's what it was like. And interestingly, a great piece of information today when I was speaking to her, she says, because at the time, when I was giving that when she was giving that derisive look of yeah, whatever, I was telling her, I was like, listen, you have to learn this stuff. Because I was telling her about the endocannabinoid system and the CB1, CB2, all these different things. And I was like, you have to learn this stuff because you're a doctor and you're going to have to know this. And she was like, yeah, whatever. Today, this is true, man. Today I was speaking to her and she said to me that she actually messaged me this last week, but today was the first time I managed to catch up with her. And she said that last week she was like, oh, I was thinking about you today. My colleague did a presentation on cannabis for kidney disease. And I was like, oh, high five. Because this is like her just messaged me over. So that was last week. And today I bumped into her and I was talking about, so what were you saying about what was the presentation? She's like, it was good. And she was like, and she was telling me this in the group of colleagues, like one of them that seemed that it sounded like she was relatively high up in the hierarchy of the medical people. She was like, can you believe this person's talking about weed? And kept calling it that. But what was brilliant about it was exactly. She was like, but what was brilliant about it was that she kept saying in her head, she was like, it annoyed me. She was like, because all I could think now was like, over and over every time, because it's been 2 or 3 patients I've came over and asked her about CBD. Last week she says that she got called down to an individual's room who had CBD gummies, and the person was asking her, like, is this going to interact with my medication? And she's like laughing and joking. She'll have to go back and Google it. I was like, you should have just phoned me. I could have told you that kind of stuff. Yeah. But the point I'm making is that was 2 years ago that I was saying that you're going to have to learn this stuff now, and that's where she'd made that exact point today by saying that she was like, that's what keeps popping in my head every time somebody presents me with, can you help me with this? It's just, Conor said I'd have to learn this stuff, and it's great because that's 2 years ago, and 2 years later, here we are, we're in a situation where it's not only that. The other thing I'll point out as well is that she was talking about how the one of the residents, if it's calling that, and somebody that's in the hospital, one of the patients was actively consuming cannabis on the ward, like in the room, and she was like, you could walk down and you could smell it on the thing, and they had their vape, that kind of stuff or whatever. I don't know if it was a vape or even a joint or whatever, but she was making the statement that it was like, it was very noticeable when you walk down that corridor. It's like you can smell it outside the room, and I mean, I am absolutely delighted when she was telling me this. I'm clapping and fucking cheering and shit,
it shows the progress of it. So I think for all corporate invested interest will move to monopolize, conglomerate, and further create networks of power and restriction. I think that people from all walks of life, I mean, it's been the stoners, it's been the hardcore, we love weed, we're going to go to prison for it, we don't care, that have carried it through the darkness. Yeah. We've now got it to enough people that, like these doctors, these academics, these professionals, even the politicians, those that have not already been bought out and already got a vested stake in their future, they're going to come to this knowledge, and with that comes a humbling and acceptance of going, shit. Yeah. So every time we go look at them with their, and whatever they apply to it, whatever they think is the druggie, the dropout, the dope head, you know what I mean? They're going to have to all of a sudden go, shit, they weren't. They were people using something we now know to be basically an essential nutrient that also has some amazing therapeutic benefits. And that is something that every government needs to be looking at introducing into the food chain, into medicines, into alternative models of consumption alongside alcohol, tobacco, even caffeine for fuck's sake. And I think that will arise. It doesn't matter how long it takes, that will happen. And I truly believe that the more people that radicalize themselves in terms of going back to what we were talking about before and become agents of free radicalness, I guess is a terrible way of describing it, you can start to fragment and break apart that deterministic future that you feel trapped in. And whether you arise to that through a belief in a God that will empower you and give you the faith and a power to go through with your life, or whether it's you arrive at a certain point of going, how absurd all of reality is, so therefore what's the point of not trying? Or if you kind of get the acceptance of, well, you're going to die anyway, or whatever philosophy or concept or ideology brings you to that worldview, I don't really care or mind, it's each to their own ultimately. But I just hope that people find that within themselves. They find that strength and the bravery to face the darkness within. Because as like Nietzsche said, you've got to face the monster within. You've got to face the darkness until you see what's there. And ultimately, it's you. You are everything you are afraid of. You are everything you love in the world, everything you hate in the world. Everything is in some way or another you, because you're experiencing it, and you are the culmination of everything that has been. But that isn't, I guess, necessarily, would be the summarization of this, determining of your future. You still have the ability to just turn left.
It's well said, man. I like it.
No, sweet. I'm aware of time on this. We definitely have to get a second and third and fourth of these conversations.
I was thinking the same thing so far.
We just scratched the surface. I've got a list of questions here where we have not even touched one. So I'm going to ask you my final question that I ask every guest.
Go for it.
Which, other than, I suppose, future conversations with me about all of this shit, what does the future hold for you?
Well, like I was saying before, we obviously got cracking. I'm doing the mental health book, so anybody that's unaware of that, obviously that's not going on social media, I'm doing a mental health awareness book. Essentially, it's raising mental health awareness, and it's a collection of about 30 images, 30 illustrations, and there's obviously going to have some writing on the other side as well, the page. So it'll be like 60 pages or so that's just highlighting mental health and raising awareness, stuff like that. So that will hopefully be the end of next week. There's also, I'm actually working on a kids book, to be honest, about cannabis. So that should be fun. Looking forward to that. I told my son about it, to be honest. He was 7 and I was showing him the pictures and stuff like that. So he's giving me pointers about how to dress the guy and all this kind of stuff. Because like I say, I tell him this stuff all the time. So that should be good fun. So yeah, hopefully in about 10 days time, I'll finish the mental health book. And then I'll hopefully have the kids book done by the end of January at the very latest. And there's also one other thing that I'm kind of working on at the moment. I don't know what I talk about, but I'll tell you off camera. But that's going to be good. That's going to be epic shit. So I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be fucking dynamite. So yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it. And again, I'm hoping to have more people on the channel that's of obviously like a legendary status with cannabis, like we were talking about Beyond Green about. Obviously both of us have interviewed Tommy Chong, and it'd be good to get more guys on like that. So or girls, like cannabis girls, whatever, it's that kind of stuff. So it's like, the more the better. Let's raise awareness and let's keep moving forward.
Yeah, man, I think the more of these conversations we can have, just the more informed we can be. And I think that anything that we can do to humble ourselves, I think is a fucking good thing, because our egos are often too rampant, because everything in society is geared to make that the dominant force of operation within our consciousness, because that's the most easily manipulable through the systems of capitalism, neoliberalistic control, and whatever the systems of restriction that we currently live under. But yeah, I've really enjoyed this. I wish you the best of luck with the book next week. I am actually quietly trying to put together a book review section for the website. So hopefully hope to some of your books in there before too long. I have to pull my finger out if I want to get all of them in there. I will include some links below as well in the bio, so people can check out everything that we've discussed. And I just want to say, yeah, dude, thank you for taking quite a bit of time to have this conversation with me. I really do appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure, Simpa. Let's say I could talk to you for fucking hours, man. So I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, man. Like I said, next week, guys, a little preview. Gonna have Martin from Martin's World on, and I did make the joke leading up to this that with Martin being Irish, we could actually get the three of us together and have an Englishman, Irishman, and Scotsman podcast where we write our own punchline.
Yeah, shout out to Martin. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, man, big, been loving what he's doing with posting the joints out to all the TDs and President.
Yeah,
President. What is that? President, yeah. I need to get caught up on my geopolitical politics here for Ireland up in here before I get him on the podcast. Well, yeah, Conor, been a fucking pleasure. Look forward to getting you back in very, very soon and continuing this conversation. So yeah, thanks again, man.
Appreciate it, Simpa. Fucking dynamite, man.
Yeah, loved it. Right, folks, if you've managed to make it to the end of this, thank you very much. You may now go to the toilet and, go out into the world. It's now 2.5 hours later. A lot might have changed. Check your phones, while you're on your phone, head on over to patreon.com. That was seamless. You see that seamless transition. That was wonderful. To patreon.com/Simpa Life, where you can kindly give £3 a month to help keep the lights on this little project of mine, so I can keep bringing these conversations to you fine folks. Right, check us out on all social media at The Simpa Life. Check out CannaMan TV everywhere. I'll include the links below. You've been wonderful. We'll see you next week with Martin from Martin's World. Peace and love, folks.